if I could have your attention at this time, we will call the school board workshop to order. We want to thank you guys for being here tonight. And Clyde and staff, thank you for all your work in counties, cities, and otherwise. We appreciate you all joining us here so that we can have this conversation about what's going on in our county and how we as a school board need to be looking at the various elements of growth and how we're going to deal with that growth going forward. Board, at this time, with your indulgence, I'm going to turn to Mr. Wells. Clyde, if you will kind of help lead and guide us through this process. I know you have a number of speakers that are joining us as well, but I'll turn to you.
Thank you, Mr. Weishire. We're excited about tonight. We've got a lot of good information. The planning groups from the county, the two cities, and the school district are here. At the last workshop 2 weeks ago, it was brought up that let's go through the growth patterns and trends for the district and for the county, so everybody gets a feel for what's coming, what's in the pipeline, and what these planning staffs have been working through. With that, I do have to say, for a time constraint, I know one group needs to get out of here at 5:30. They have a planning meeting tonight. I know.
That's all right. We need to be done.
We'd like to be done.
So I was going to say, that's fine, okay?
Yep.
But with that, I'd like to invite David Tomac up with the county to lead off and to go over his presentation. Following the growth trends, we're going to invite our friends from the Growth Management Task Force to come up. They would like to discuss the vacation, short-term rental, resort area, and the impact fee. And then we will also go over some of the urban school designs that Mr. Tomac has brought, that the county had put a charrette together in 2013 with part of our staff and BRPH to look at the urban school designs, what other districts around the United States are doing, and how we may incorporate it into some of these DRIs and things that are coming out of the ground. So, David, thank you and welcome.
Dave, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Hey, well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I tend to drag on, so if you just bob off and hit your head on the table, I'll know we're finished.
Keep your eye on Thacker. He'll let you know if you're going.
Okay. Yeah, and he's almost within arm's reach. So Clarence can hit me real quick. Yeah, there you go. So the county's about close to 1 million acres. So, the stuff that you guys are really concerned about for schools is a big area. You got the two cities here to talk about what's within the city. We focus most of our development in what we call an urban growth boundary. And the urban growth boundary was kind of established to help us kind of plan for infrastructure. Schools is one of those things. Schools is an infrastructure item for the county. First map I wanted to show you actually shows you what that urban growth boundary looks like. It's just under 300,000 acres. So it's still pretty big. The area in red kind of outlines that boundary. And we tried to put in the two city boundaries. And around the city of St. Cloud, I think we also included their water service boundary to show you kind of what they'll eventually annex as well. So that kind of gives you an idea of kind of where the different areas are. Now, to go through the rest of this presentation, we broke up our development trends into 3 groups, mainly because you can see these numbers. The capacity in that urban growth boundary is pretty huge. So what we tried to do was we look at things when people come in for a pre-application conference. That's folks looking to buy property or do something with their property. They'll come in and meet with us and talk about concepts. So that's one color. That's the green color. People that are getting serious start getting entitlements. They come in for what we call zoning applications or entitlements, development orders, things of that nature. And that's going to be seen in red on these maps. And then the folks that are really serious and start spending money on what we call site development plans, subdivisions, and permits, that's the gold yellow color. And you'll see the numbers go down remarkably through those processes, because a lot of folks will get their entitlements or they'll come in for pre-apps. By the time they actually get serious and moved into construction, the numbers whittle down a little bit. So they're still pretty big, but they're not as huge as the numbers you'll see for the folks that are actually just looking at what they can do. First area, we're looking at is the Narcoossee area. You know, as if you're developing property, most of the time you want to develop around the existing infrastructure. So the Narcoossee area is booming because we just improved Narcoossee Road. So it's not a surprise that folks are looking to subdivide. That's the area closest to Medical City. It's driving a lot of it. It's close to Orange County, so we're starting to get that next wave of growth. So residential development-wise, you can see that we've rezoned for about another 10,000 residential units in that corridor, north of 192. We'll talk about Hickory Tree next. And as far as subdivisions that we've actually been approving, we've got about just under 1,200 units. And you can actually see it. A lot of it's been around Jack Brack and between the lake and the Narcoossee Road.
The average subdivision is 1,200 units or 1,200?
Total, for all the subdivisions that we've approved,
Which are these yellows, right?
which are in the yellow, yes. So you got it up by Cyril's Road, you've got a couple of major developments. Down by Jack Brack, you've got about 2 or 3.
A
And
bunch of DRIs coming.
yeah, that's the initial number
Okay.
that you see on the bottom there. The pre-development and zoning, that's 10,000 units.
Okay, so
So-
1,200 units, do you expect those to come online in the next,
They're already putting in roads and
So within 12 months.
and building houses. Yeah, over the next year or two.
okay.
Dave,
The,
before you continue, but in context with that, what is with the big picture of all the different areas that you're going to break down, and maybe you're going to cover this later, but the anticipated build-out for these various areas and what you guys are looking at, that you see so many rooftops in year 1, year 2, year 6, year 8. Are you going to go over that?
Yeah, a lot depends on the individual builders, how many units they take down and how many they can do in a year. But we've been doing a little over, I want to say, close to 1,000 units a year. You know, and I think our population for single family, it's closer to around 300 or 400 a year.
And are you anticipating, based on what you're seeing, that number to remain steady, increase, or?
It's actually going to go up.
Okay, that's what
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
Yeah. It's this is supposed to be our slow start. I think the slow start's gone a little bit quicker than what we first projected, and I think a lot of that has to do with some of the fee waivers and the streamlined procedures that we put into place during the downturn.
Right.
So I think we got a good quick start, but they're talking about 4 to 5% a year.
Right. So you're talking about 1,000 rooftops right now per year, with an increase happening year 2, year 3 in the out years.
Yeah.
So we're talking 2,500 students roughly, based on rooftops and normal generation rates, somewhere in that general range per year.
Yeah, and I think the census has us doubling in population by like 2040. That gives you kind of a general idea. Now where it happens, that's what we'll be talking about. The question that Commissioner Wheeler had is a good one on this sheet. We got what we call Mixed Use District 8. A lot of folks know it as the Deseret property out the Northeast District. So there's some numbers on build out there. That could be a city unto itself at build out. But you know, when you talk about build out for that Northeast District, you know, you're talking 30 years. So it'll take a long time to get to 30,000 dwelling units.
Sure.
So.
More importantly, we've got 2.5 million square feet of non-residential to come out of the ground and start paying taxes.
Yeah, and they got some policies, there's some policies in their development order that actually call that out, being in the first phase before they move into the second
Yeah, we can
phase.
use that money.
So that's kind of that Narcoossee corridor, which into itself is just a big draw right now. Okay, so Hickory Tree area, which is the next area, is south of 192. So most of the infrastructure there has really been built by the city of St. Cloud. So I'm sure they'll talk a lot about the Nolte Road corridor and those areas. We've been getting a lot of speculation along the Hickory Tree corridor itself. We've got, I think one development was close to 1,200 units just by itself, right at Nolte and Hickory Tree. You're looking at a total of subdivisions that we've had come in close to 1,800 units. They're not going as quickly as the Narcoossee corridor because they need more infrastructure. So that pace will be less. And then there's some infrastructure things programmed for Hickory Tree. I think once that all happens in like the next 5-10 years, then you'll actually see it more aggressive on the south side of 192. The Lake Toho area, this is the Greenfield area. This is the stuff all along the east shore of Lake Toho. So you got like, I think they're still calling themselves Toho Preserve, Tahokwa, Edgewater, Green Island. You hear those names. It's this Greenfield mixed-use development. And this is part of the county doing some upfront planning work with property owners and with the Urban Land Institute to try to come up with a mixture of development densities and intensities that would help us pay for infrastructure a little bit better. So you're going to see the densities in this area up a little bit higher. Right now, you know, what we talk about, 6,700 units that have been zoned, primarily on the north side of Kissimmee Park Road at this point. You'll see Toho Preserve has already started doing some road work. And so the residential that's actually been under subdivisions and site development permits is closer to 4,000 units.
When you say residential, you're talking about single family and apartments?
And
So
multifamily.
you're talking, okay,
Yeah.
single family, any family dwelling?
Yes, sir. Yeah, and you know, they sell so many houses per month.
I get it.
You know, with the multifamily, they put in 300 and 600 at a time, so that's why a lot of your units that we talked about earlier, the mix is multifamily. So this is what we're calling mixed-use districts 1 and 2, and this is where we see a huge, in the next 5-10 years, is where we see a huge amount of growth. And I know your staff's been working with the different developers in that area to acquire school sites, et cetera, for that. The Point Siena area,
Dave, I'm sorry, I think you said it, but what do you think the build out of the yellow is here?
oh,
5
yeah, I
years?
think 5-10 years.
Okay.
Yeah, it's, yeah, my guess is it's a couple hundred units a year.
Okay.
And depending on the market, it may not all be in that area for that growth. Okay. You made me think, Clarence, I lost my space.
I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Back to Point Siena. So this area has experienced a lot of growth in the past. So a lot of the Point Siena area is built out. I think you can see from the zonings and the development, a lot of that is on the Pleasant Hill corridor, the Bella Lagos, and then at the north end of Point Siena. We're not seeing a whole lot going on in what I call Point Siena proper, closer to Cypress Parkway. There is a lot of stuff that's been building up closer to that Sunrail station at 1792 and Point Siena, but a lot of that's going to be non-residential. You'll still get some residential along the old Tampa Highway corridor, but you'll probably see that if you keep inviting us after this, if you still want to do this after we get done today. You know, probably in about 5 years, we'll be talking more seriously about that area.
I mean, I was out there today, but I didn't see much, but do you anticipate any growth of single-family units near the hospital at all?
Yeah, but the problem, it's not a problem, is they're mainly built out. You're going to see a lot on the Polk side. I think the villages that haven't
Okay.
built out are going to be on the Polk County side. But you can, I think there's close to 80,000 people in Point Siena, both Osceola and Polk side already. So there's not a lot of vacant land
Well,
available.
there's greenfield all around that hospital.
Yeah.
They might own it, I don't know, but I mean, I just saw a lot of
Well,
green
and-
space around it.
And what we're hoping for are medical office and
Sure.
employment kind of stuff. And I think you saw a senior living facility that just went up on Cypress Parkway. But a lot of the villages that were going to be built out for single family, they're pretty much on the Osceola County side been built. Shingle Creek area, one of my favorite areas because we got the regional park right there, which is really cool. And I know the city of Kissimmee is working to finish the bike ped trail that's all along there. It's gorgeous if you all haven't experienced it. That's a nice amenity. But the big thing here is that's a huge area for non-residential, so you don't see a lot of residential development. Recently, we've had some entitlements switch, so you'll see the Osceola Trace area along Osceola Parkway and Point Santa Boulevard. Lennar's pretty much bought that out, a lot of it. So a lot of that's going to be going residential, and you'll be talking about short-term residential later. But so a lot of that's been switched. The reason the zoning shows 56,000 dwelling units capacity is because a lot of our zoning in that corridor is commercial tourist now, and that allows for a higher density of residential, a lot of multifamily, as well as non-residential. So it allows for that mixture of use, try to make it more transit-oriented. So you got a huge capacity potential. Right now, we're just working with some of the single-family stuff that Lennar's doing.
So is the plan for this, that old convention center site, what do you call that?
Mm-hmm.
Is that is going to be short-term rental?
That's the
Primarily?
convention stuff on the north side of Osceola Parkway. We haven't gotten anything yet. The stuff on the south side of Osceola Parkway is pretty much all residential.
Is
subdivision.
it short-term rental, or is it more, at this point, or are they looking at?
It looks more like short-term rental
But it's
so
not-
far.
But for it to really be short-term rental, it's gotta be deed restricted, because otherwise it turns into older inventory like Indian Wells and original.
Well, we're going to talk about that later, whether that's a good.
Yeah, and you'll have a map. You can see that whole corridor is in our short-term rental overlay where we allow it. And so that's one of the big reasons when we talk about short-term rental on that west side.
Is that expanded east? from where it
There's
used
a
to be?
there's a little piece around Osceola Heritage Park by the Turnpike.
Yeah, but I mean, the big piece, has
No.
it moved east, or is that the piece?
Hasn't
Is that the
shifted.
eastern border? Okay, I don't know why.
It hasn't
a little
shifted.
further.
Yeah,
Okay.
every time I try to change the border, they tell me about some statute that doesn't let me change anything, so it's pretty much stable.
Okay.
So that's why the number's kind of low on the development side for Shingle Creek. It's mainly the Lennar stuff. The northwest area, this is pretty much, again, the tourist area, short-term rental area. A lot of the numbers you see on maximum residential for development, 2,200 units that we got subdivided, is pretty much the Stony Brook Champions Gate area. Reunion's doing some stuff. But they're just starting to get into the subdivision game. So next year you'll see some numbers from Reunion. But most of it's what Lennar's doing out in Stony Brook, and Champions Gate's just getting started on some residential stuff close to the golf course.
Dave, do you have it broken up at all? When we look at like this northwest area and we see the 2,200 units, being able to break those out between what's been put in for short-term or resort residential as opposed to primary?
Yeah, right now we don't make the distinction when we permit it. So you can have a house going in that you could rent short-term or long-term.
Right.
Once you actually close on it, get the CO, you can go get your business tax receipt for short-term rental and start renting it out short-term, working with a property manager or whatever. Or you can sell it to somebody who lives there permanently.
Right.
For the county, short-term rental is more of an allowance. So when you're in that area, because of the influence of all the tourist destinations, it's a kind of a niche market.
Right.
We
and I
kind of
asked
kept it in that area because of the competition with other single-family development.
Yeah, and I asked because, as this board is looking at these numbers and trying to figure out how this correlates to student generation and what we need to deal with,
Mhm.
and then going into the conversation we're going to have later about the resort residential piece, it's one thing for us to look at all of these aggregate amounts and say, okay, this is what we're dealing with. It's another thing to say,
Yeah.
well, in reality, this section isn't going to generate as many students or otherwise. That's why I was asking. It's
Yeah.
a fine answer. I just was curious.
Yeah, and I think your staff did a study with this impact fee study where they started looking at what the generation by geographic area was. So I think you got a little bit of a baseline this time for, in the past, I can tell you, we really haven't tracked it a whole lot. I could probably go back and get a history of the business tax receipts for those areas and look at the total number of residential units and that, if that's of any value to you guys, that wouldn't be too hard to get. If that kind of gives you an idea of what percentage would actually end up being short-term rental.
I'm not too sure what Clyde and Rhonda have done. Don't do the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, they did,
Yeah.
they did their own individual study this time.
Yeah,
So-
and we have it, Ron is telling us already.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so you may already have that
Yeah, you need
answer.
to do it.
Thank you. So in this northwest area, a lot of units, a great market for short-term rental, and so you're seeing that market's actually starting to move fast now. And once West Side, I think the key there is West Side Boulevard. As you see West Side get completed south all the way to Belicita, then you get a lot more development along that corridor that'll fill it in. That's probably the one area where we can call for 20,000 units. We'll probably get there. Okay, so this kind of gives you a summary countywide. And like I said, we've already processed about 10,000 dwelling units of residential on the development side. Zoning-wise, folks getting their entitlements over 100,000 units of capacity. And we've barely touched the urban infill area. So there's a lot of capacity even within the urban infill area for new development, residential and non-residential. And a lot of it's because of the increased densities in those greenfield mixed-use areas that we talked about.
Dave, if the development is kind of a five-year, give or take a little bit build out, what do you think the zoning is? Is that
Oh, God.
10 to 20, 30?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
because you can get zoning. We did free zoning for about 18 months. So anybody who was smart came in and rezoned their property to make it saleable.
Okay.
Yeah, that could
Okay,
be.
so that's a,
And that 10,000 units for development, that could easily be a 10, 20-year window.
okay,
So we've definitely jump-started that market.
good.
Next map just shows you a little bit more of the urban growth boundary. The only thing I want to have you focus on here is the blue areas, those mixed-use areas with higher densities. So you can see it around Lake Toho. You can see it up in the northeast area with the Deseret properties. That's where we're really trying to push some densities so that we can have more efficient infrastructure.
And you believe that the city will annex all the way to the urban growth boundary in St. Cloud?
We have a joint planning area agreement with St. Cloud to kind of efficiently get the boundaries. And so I do believe that they'll eventually annex. You can talk to Dennis more about that. It's a lot of work to annex properties, so it may take them 20 or 30 years to do that. But I do believe that eventually they will have that box.
The road there beyond the Southport connector east, when, your estimation on the build out of that?
Oh, geez, south of Kissimmee Park Road, east of the.
Well, it will be actually from the Turnpike to 192 Harmony, I guess, out that way.
I think the Southport connector.
But it's east, the east part of
Yeah,
the Southport connector.
Yeah, once the Southport connector comes in, that'll be what kickstarts development in that area. Otherwise, you're pretty much limited to Harmony and whatever happens in that Narcoossee corridor. My guess is 20 years.
20.
Yeah.
Dave, are you gonna talk about, in here, in some of these growth areas, kind of some of the planning theories that y'all are trying to drive with the neighborhood centers and the community? Okay, you're gonna.
Yeah, that's coming up.
Somebody is, okay.
That's coming up next. So that kind of gives you an idea of some of the growth areas in the county. My guess is, looking around the table, you guys are pretty much know these areas, because most of you guys have been around for a while and have seen kind of some of the things that have kickstarted some of those areas.
Is that right? Tell us we're old.
Eh. I'm just telling you, you've been here as long as I have. So you've seen a lot of this fall into place. The next thing I was going to talk to you a little bit about were these mixed-use districts and some of the principles that we're dealing with. So, we're talking about these mixed-use districts where we've adopted these special standards for, trying to get balance, the growth between jobs and housing. And also trying to get the densities to the point where we got some walkable areas.
And that's really, just so everybody for clear, it's really these dark blues on that prior map.
Yeah.
So it's not what's going on in these
Right, yeah.
hinterlands, it's
Well,
it's where you've got nothing there.
Yeah, an example would be in like most of our urban infill, the non-blue stuff, you're looking at an average density of about dwelling unit an acre. You know, and what we're trying to encourage within the blue is a minimum of 5 units to the acre, up to 25 units to the acre in some of the downtown, or in some of the activity areas. So it's a big change. When they were doing the policies in the comp plan, that was before my time, but one of the reasons for doing it that way was had a lot of existing growth in the county. You know, to do that in the green fields, it's easier to implement your policies and more aggressively. Around existing development, we had to make policies that were a little bit more, you know, kind of recognizing existing growth and not just, you know, tearing up existing neighborhoods. And so that was kind of a way to transition it.
Dave, we know there's a study from 10 years ago or sometime, a fish count study, that said back then it was $250 plus $1,000 for a house to pay for itself. We all think it's lower than that now, somewhere
Yeah.
between 200 and 250.
Right.
When you do this type of development, does it lower that amount
No, what it does,
that it costs?
what it does, it lowers it a little bit. But remember, there's also some enhanced infrastructure that goes in
Okay.
with it, because
So
you got
that
the
eats
alleys
it,
and
okay.
stuff like that. But what it does with the, kind of the quality of the development and the closeness of jobs, it actually reduces the impact on that infrastructure. So instead of having to build a mile of road to get you to work, I can average building it half a mile.
Right.
Which actually reduces that cost to
Right.
the capital. But as far as the annual maintenance, because of the increase in quality, you're probably still looking at the same.
Okay.
Our guess is that the blue areas will pay for themselves just because of the market and what they actually will be selling for.
And I'm understanding you correctly, the dark blue areas are where you're gonna have the higher densities?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, for residential.
So they hope.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
and,
with
that and, well, in the 192 corridor, that commercial tourist area, that, we're trying to encourage densities even higher than the 25, just because we want to have the high rises and let the tourists be a lot closer to their activities. So, talked about some of the areas that were in blue. The area south of Lake Tahoe, again, this is longer term. We do have folks looking at it, but the infrastructure is just not available right now. You can see the numbers, though, between residential and employment, that they are like another city, 40,000 units. This will be meetings out, though. We won't be talking a whole lot about this until we actually get the Southport connector and some of the other infrastructure in place.
Dave, you just said something made me think, when you, talking about your tourist corridor with the high rises and so forth, is that sort of a plan to drive a lot of total redevelopment on what's there?
Oh, yeah.
Tear down some,
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
trying to
'cause-
force,
Yeah, if you're knocking down the 1 and 2 story drive-up hotels.
That's what you're trying-
You've got to give them.
part of what
the
you're trying to
density.
do.
Yeah, you got to give them the density to where it's profitable to tear down and then rebuild. An example would be if I took 4 of those hotels with like 50 units, that's like about 200 units, but spread out over like maybe 10 acres.
Mhm.
And if I allowed them to go to the higher density and they can get like 1,500 units in there, then they could actually make the numbers work to tear it down.
tear it down.
Yeah, so,
Good. I think that sounds good.
yeah, and then we don't have to buy it. Somebody
Tear
else
it
can
down.
buy it and tear it down.
Is there any discussion in that corridor about some of those units going away from big box retailers like Costco or Lowe's or car dealers, things like that at all?
You know, so far, most of the hotels that they're gonna be tearing down are going back to resort hotel. But you know, the resort hotels also include a mixture of commercial as part of their package. You know, so they'll have the funky water park kind of
I mean, they need
array.
something,
and
because when Disney started
restaurant
having the
front.
$49, $59, $69 properties, all those hotels and motels in West 182, they all died, because the
Yeah.
tourists just, they stopped going. They started, they stay at Disney $50 a night.
Yeah.
That's what killed it.
Yeah, the counties established what they call the West 192 Development Authority,
Mhm.
and their specific goal is to address some of that very thing,
So they're still running
the
that?
changing condition. So far, yeah.
Okay.
And so what they're working on now is they're working with the current property owners for strategies to help improve their viability, and also working with potential buyers to actually work through some of those issues so that they do buy it and redevelop. And our part is merely making sure that you got the regulations in place to encourage that to go quickly once they make the decision. So. Okay, so now we're on mixed-use district. We talked about the Northeast District already. So between those two mixed-use districts, you had south of Toho and the Northeast District, you had close to 70,000 units. So there's a lot of future development, but I don't think any of it's in your short-term planning. Okay, this is the area that we just talked about for east of Lake Toho, and you can see the breadth of that along the turnpike and on the east shore of Lake Toho. And this is one where we are starting to put the infrastructure in place and working with developers, and so this is your growth area for those greenfields. There's a couple of mixed-use districts that are like on the perimeter that you just should be aware of, but I think it's like we talked about, when is that area gonna really start? Those are future things as well. The Center Lake off of Narcoossee is one, and then down by Alligator Lake on the south side of 192. Believe it or not, District 9, West Side Boulevard, next to Polk County, is a mixed-use district. Most of it's already been developed on the north side, closer to 192. That's the stuff that's down by Stony Brook that'll be a big boom eventually. And I'm thinking the way Stony Brook's going, in the next 5 years, you'll probably be seeing West Side getting constructed and opening up for more development there. So here's what Clarence was talking about. This is the concept plan for Tahokwa and Toho Preserve. And what we're trying to do is provide for centers so that you can actually have employment and services close to where you live.
On the Tahokwa concept plan, it says K-8 school site. Is that the high school site?
The K-8 school site?
That's what
Right
it
here.
says. Okay, you got the high school site. Where's the other one? on the plan?
Left bottom.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's in
close-
the-
Dark brown.
Dark
Close-
brown next to
Opposite
dark brown,
side.
okay.
Close to the wetlands, yeah.
Now, wouldn't it make sense, though, to try to get the two schools next to each other so they can share some amenities? So you can have ball fields, I mean, I'm just throwing that, I know high schools use, but wouldn't that make sense?
The part of what we're talking about in these concept plans would be to actually have the parks be part of the community system, and to have the schools in close proximity so that you could use them during the day, and then the rest of the time you would have them accessible to the community. My guess is they put the K through 8 there.
So in that
to take
concept, you have all the
advantage.
parking with the parks, so the school doesn't have to accommodate parking and that could be part
Not
of
as
that.
much, right. That's what we're going to talk about next, is the potential within this kind of a system to actually share some of that infrastructure. Stormwater, parking, parks, and that way your footprint of the actual buildable site can be reduced.
No, that's great.
What is this, the high school and the elementary side in this concept plan? Do you know how big they are,
How big are they?
acre-wise?
I think the high school site on this
It's
sheet,
46 acres.
Under
High school
50?
site, Clyde? Usable, none of it has to be wet.
Off-site retention and everything, it's 40, it'll work.
and the K-8 school site is what, 20 acres?
20,
20
Does it
acres.
have retention on it too?
off-site.
Yeah. And I think the reason they put the K down there is because it's adjacent to the regional park down there, and it makes sense for the kids to get some environmental education, et cetera. But you can see on the top, you got a community center that is close to Neptune, and you've also got some higher density residential closer to that. And the grid system for the roads, the master stormwater systems, they're all intended to kind of drive a quality of life to where folks can do a lot more walking, biking, mass transit.
So Clyde,
Yes.
that's Neptune Middle School, all those white buildings, right?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Right
So what-
across the street.
What does that become then?
It'll stay.
I mean, that,
It'll stay.
there'd be that many,
These developments should
There'll be
feed
that
these
many.
schools. Now, Toho Preserve has, in it also a elementary school site, which is on the next page. So the two developments together along Neptune Road, there's 3 school sites. You have an elementary, a K-8, and then a high school. The generation rate for those developments that build out, those schools should be able to take what's in the development. That's the theory.
Yeah, we're trying to make the school sites work to where the elementary or the K through 8s can actually be walkable within a radius to where they are walkable.
What do you
And,
have, you've got a neighborhood center as a small unit, right? What
Yes,
is-
sir.
Explain what the neighborhood center is.
The neighborhood center's kind of smaller. It's like 5 acres, 6 acres, and it includes some services. It could include institutional uses, church, fire station, those kinds of things. And the idea is to have some services close to the residential areas. So that way you don't have to just keep rezoning them for that kind of stuff. And then you build up to the community center level, 20 acres plus, which includes a little bit more retail, Like the neighborhood center could include the neighborhood bar, for those of us who know about neighborhood bars.
If it's okay, I'd like to, before we go into the urban school, the charrette designs and everything, I'd like to allow the two cities to show their growth, so we're kind of all together.
okay.
I know they've got to.
Okay, well, that's a
they
good
have
stopping
plan.
point then.
Would that be okay, David?
This is perfect.
And then we'll come back to it. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. Dennis, you want to, or Kissimmee?
Thanks,
You want Craig, or, come on out,
Nobody
Dennis.
get their head on the table.
That's
all I
was good.
needed.
do you want me to hit my head on the table?
Good evening, gentlemen.
You hit that on PowerPoint?
For those of you who don't know Ted, he may not always
doesn't
be as
know
fast
Ted?
as Dave.
Who doesn't know Tad?
Ted is our planning and zoning manager now.
Dave was a
So
segue.
very happy to have him over there at the city.
Mr. Wheeler, hello. Tad, how are you?
I keep handing mine off.
Whenever you say Mr. Wheeler, I look at my dad.
They're in the book too. Yeah. They're, this is in your book.
Oh, is it?
also. Should be.
Better to bring 2 than not to have 1. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, guys. I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of get
Well,
through.
certainly, I'll introduce what we've provided you is kind of a summary of some very recent activity that's taken place. You heard earlier from Dave Tomac that there's an interlocal agreement and a joint planning area. And in the packet, you can see the area that is inside the joint planning area. I had the pleasure to come to work December 1st with St. Cloud. In the very first 2 weeks, they went through the annexation of 535 properties at once, which is no small undertaking, based on that joint planning area. And quite strategically, we're able to not only annex the property, but rezone it and change the land use all in a comparable way that didn't require a length of time, what normally would take a much longer period of time. And those areas are shared, as David mentioned about the development approvals that exist. Those are within the joint planning area. The projects south of Lake Toho and east of Lake Toho are 2 projects the county's approved as mixed uses, and they've come into the city. And I think that's kind of like the thrust of what I've tried to put here in these panels, is that the county is losing property to the city, but they're not losing the development controls and the provisions that you've seen. As David spoke about mixed uses and neighborhood developments and school sightings, it's just transitioning into the city limits. And so certainly I look forward to being able to assist in that regard with that transition, and also the fact that, as I saw somebody in the audience earlier, that in some of these concepts were literally being table discussions some number of years before I came back. And it's very interesting to me to see them matured, and now that they're speaking of development or they're under development.
Right.
We're essentially taking the county comprehensive plan and land development code language and importing it right into our book. So we'll be implementing the same standards at the same densities, the same.
So if somebody's already got entitlements, they keep them, they go.
And I think also, and you were talking earlier about the infrastructure, and the entitlements are one side of that fence, and the other side of the fence are that the infrastructures are also provided in the same manner that had been negotiated through the county's development. Urban sections, multimodal areas, essentially transit-oriented communities. And I think the other one, what I've tried to provide you are some of the examples of the annexation documents that took place, and also the another word that you'll also hear, which is different than the 535 at one time annexation, was annexations based on encumbrance reports. Encumbrance documentation was parties, either individual lot owners or in some cases subdivisions, where developers seeking water and sewer from the city of St. Cloud are required to sign an agreement that says upon the termination, upon qualification, annexation will occur. And you can see on the one panel I provided, there's been a number of acres already gone under and in process literally in this next month for the final approval of the annexations based on those encumbrances. And the issue of encumbrances, they in turn will work somewhat like a dominoing effect. That is, you encumber one property, it then abuts another property, and you continue on that path. It was illustrated earlier that the urban service boundary and the joint planning area extend up into Narcoossee. And essentially that would be the future 20, 30 years out on a piecemeal approach or in a holistic approach, as you would where a whole mixed unit development would come online, you would annex that project. And you'll see that in the news. We've tried to separate the terminology as citizens, obviously have concerns. What's taking place with an encumbrance and what's taking place with an enclave, they're words, but they're different in their application.
So, I lost a little bit. Is in some number of years where the joint planning area is the idea that eventually turns into the city of St. Cloud?
That's
so you're going to cross the canal?
Well, Columbus crossed the ocean. So.
Yeah, but that's a bigger canal.
That's true.
Yes, we'll be over there.
Okay.
Good question.
No.
Kissimmee's invading?
St. Cloud's
Can
invading.
we jump ahead on a piece of this? Is that okay? Or you want to go?
No, please.
Okay, going towards the back, you've
Yeah.
got this development project page. There's about 2,300 approved lots on there. When do you anticipate those? I mean, is this over 10 years? Is this going to be built up? What do we know about this right now?
I can probably tell you a little bit.
There you go.
Lancaster Park East, this is the first phase of their final plat, and they're just gung-ho. They are going at it now. If you go out on Nova
Roads are
Road,
in, sidewalks are in.
well, they're building them now.
Okay.
If you go out on Nova Road, you will see the infrastructure going in.
Okay.
That's a Ryland Home project, and they're going as fast as they can. So I anticipate that that'll triple over the next 3 or
So
3
That's
to
the
5
first
years.
one on the left?
So the 150 is
Yeah.
going to be 450?
The 150 is the first phase.
So these 2,300 units total of all these, explain, so these are all going on right now?
Well, not necessarily, like this airfield, that's in the process of getting approved, but it's not, they're not actually building that right now. But that would be the total number. Lancaster Park West, they're going for their final plat, they're gung-ho.
So these are all different phases, each one
Right.
of these is different.
The east, they're on the first phase, but will be a fast build-out. The preserves at Turtle Creek, they're going right now, that's the first phase. That's the second phase of the old Turtle Creek plan, and you could go out there and see the construction activity.
Your Lancaster Park used to be Turtle Creek. Okay, those are, you're saying the first phases, they're going gung-ho. So the question I've got then is, you said Lancaster Park used to make it 3 times that size. You got 115 here, so we could add 300 lots to that one. And then Reserve at Turtle Creek, how many more lots do we add to the 122? Another 300, another 200, another 100? So what's that 2,300 actually equal?
Let me explain. To simplify the table you have, I didn't break it into what is a preliminary subdivision plan versus a final.
Just right. That's all
I
I
did
got.
ask that none of these are what are water and sewer level engineering plans. So these are what would be, as Dave Tomac mentioned, kind of that gradient level of development. You go from discussions to conceptual to floration, getting a final subdivision plans, moving you down the way. And I think what I'm sure Kissimmee will agree. I know that I can see that just not only in this community, but where I just came from, that through this recessionary period, there were a lot of plans and the entitlements. What's happening now is kind of like what happens when the weeds start growing, so to speak, is it's ripened for development. These projects are out there and they're going to start growing. And that's where the fast-paced development will take place.
I guess then, and that's a great explanation. So my follow-up question is then, what do you anticipate? And if you don't know, you don't know, but looking at a 5-year, year one, there's going to be X number of new residential units. Year two, I mean, of people actually occupying rooftop homes. I guess that's what we and maybe you have that, it just isn't in here, I don't know.
Well, we did 541 in the last 12 months.
Okay.
We're anticipating between 750 and 1,000 for, at least for the next 5 years, each year. I wouldn't be surprised if we
Say
exceeded
4,000 over the
750
next 5
That is
years.
in the,
in
is
the
that,
city limits.
that's my question, is that in the city limits or in this whole boundary area?
It's in the city limits.
Okay.
Now, as we annex, that number could go up if there's something happening in the
That's
whole
2,000
boundary.
students.
So we got 1,000 coming in here from what Dave said earlier, you got just short of 1,000, and then we got some Kissimmee stuff that we're gonna talk about. Okay,
Probably short of it's a lot of new schools.
Yeah.
leave your wallets.
I did that this morning at home. I had to go home and get it.
Didn't leave it here. That's what Clarence meant.
So we put this together in short order, and we can provide a lot of
appreciate
data when, if we want to have follow-up meetings, we can pretty much
Well, I just,
customize it to what you want.
From a planning perspective, we just need to know, you're giving us, you're telling us over 5 years, figure 4,000 units.
I think you could
Is-
easily say that. And of course, we don't know how fast the jump is going to happen. Ted mentioned earlier, it kind of, it started, no, I think it was Dave mentioned, it started kickstarting and pretty soon it's going to really be in high gear, but we don't know exactly when that shift is going to take place.
And I just want to be sure as we're looking at sites, we're taking all this into, like that high school site on the plan we looked at a minute ago. Maybe the total build-out, the initial build-out doesn't make it worthwhile, but you got that whole piece next door, which is back in your backyard, or this left side, west side, that's gonna come, so it's kind of looking at the whole picture, not just immediate needs, but what's the long-term.
Mine's a catch-22.
And balancing the two, isn't
It's
it?
a catch, because even so, while we love the development, we don't get the money until the house COs.
Get that
Correct.
And that's-
Just take into account the airstrip.
Mhm.
That butts St. Cloud High. I mean,
Right.
you just moved a little pocket of kids from there, you know what you went through with that. So that's gonna be a rather large development once it comes out of the ground. And you're gonna have to find seats for those kids as well, not just at the high school, but.
And that's where I'm saying maybe some of these
Right.
other schools, while it may not be their ultimate destination, it may
Right.
be a very good interim destination for 5 years or 10
Yeah.
years.
Because that's a
You know,
big
is it-
track right in the heart there
St.
next
Cloud.
to St. Cloud.
Yeah,
St.
that-
Cloud,
This
Michigan Avenue.
this little pink area is the area that's got me long-term, this pink area and this pink area. The Narcousie Road and the area around Tahokwa, and then on the other side of the turnpike in there, I think just logically that seems like an area
Well,
that's gonna go.
Well, we're talking about St. Cloud, I mean, the other issue that really is kind of like the 800-pound gorilla nobody wants to address is we got to rebuild Michigan Avenue Elementary. That thing, we've had to rebuild that for 5 years now. It's a great school, but it's beyond its useful life. We're still making it work.
Well, I know one thing I wanted to add was I had the pleasure of meeting with the working group, or the TWIG as it would be, just in the past month, less than 3 weeks. And that group, I think, is planning on meeting, convening, discussing these very points. And I think watching the growth in the school board's problem is you're one jurisdiction over 3. You've got 3 presentations here today about growth in each respective area, but the generality is you get the growth in one respective area.
And we don't approve one new unit.
That's correct. And in the sense of it, I think the real focus is to keep an eye on this very subject of what is meant by a project, what is a development plan, what's an engineering plan, when is something going to develop, when are the rooftops coming? And certainly I hope the working group can kind of start working on keeping an eye on that focus, because you're going to have this potential of having residential developments occur in St. Cloud all of a sudden, and then in Kissimmee all of a sudden. I quite frankly was just overwhelmingly amazed. I was gone from this area for quite a few years, and on one of the visits I came back, the plane for some reason decided to fly north up Highway 15. All the other routes I came in from the north brought me straight into OIA. It looked the same as it always did. But when that plane banked over east of St. Cloud and flew directly up Highway 15, and I'm looking out the window going, where'd the 4-lane road come from? And the housetops, and that was just in the time that I was gone in 3 to 5 years. And needless to say, I was pretty amazed, and that's from a person that spent some time here, so I think it's fair to reason you're going to have that. So keep an eye on where the development's thrust is going from here to there, and all in the big picture will certainly help school
Ted,
planning.
there didn't used to be bumper-to-bumper traffic anywhere in Osceola County.
Well, thanks both of you guys for being here, for choosing to be a part of this with us, and for sharing your insight on what's happening in the city of St. Cloud. We know we look forward to this conversation continuing, because as you pointed out, we do have to figure out how to deal with this as a whole, and you guys are a very important part of that, so we appreciate your time and expertise.
I just want to say one more thing. As you look at plans when we send them over, mostly, you know, the focus is on students and student spaces, but traffic is a huge concern, and if you would take into account that, or your planners will, because we'll look at the airfield property. You know, we got Michigan, and is the biggest road, and they're going to have a connection to Michigan, and we're trying to make sure that they hook to Missouri, probably 17th, and even go down Indiana to Nolte. So we need that kind of input from the school as well, to kind of reinforce good traffic planning.
Before you know it, to be a St. Cloud Parkway.
Well, and the truth of it is, traffic flows better when our buses aren't on the roads. So the better we can design all this, and the more we can do these neighborhood schools, the better it's going to be for all of us, not just for the kids and what we're trying to do for the community, but for you guys and trying to figure out the transportation woes that exist all the way across this county. So.
Do we have I assume that we do have a process in place where Clyde's group is in touch with you guys regularly in the county and the city?
Absolutely.
I assume we do.
Rhonda's group, they review the applications as they come in. They will comment on them. Like Dennis said, we typically will put in there what the impact for students is going to be. But that's certainly an element we need to look at as far as busing or sidewalks or however, you know, transportation to get the kids there. As well as we sit on the planning board.
Right.
So we have a representative, non-voting, but we are on them, so.
Okay.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Please reach out.
Ted, Dennis, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Craig, thanks, Dennis. Thanks.
Come
Good
on
seeing
up.
you,
We'll
Ted.
have Craig Pollen with the
Pleasure.
city of Kissimmee.
Thank you,
Good
guys.
to see you.
Thank you, guys.
Craig, how are you doing?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Good. Thanks for joining us as well.
I'll probably be much quicker. If you know our mayor, he likes short presentations, so I tend to rocket through these pretty good. The city of Kissimmee is entering a different kind of development than the other two jurisdictions. We are doing more redevelopment than new development, and this is for a lot of different reasons. We are running out of vacant land for new development, and also property we can annex that would be vacant and undeveloped really isn't there anymore either. So we're looking at redeveloping portions of the city. We still do have new development. I do apologize for the simplicity of this map, but it's the best way to show what's going on at Tapestry right now. Tapestry is on the north side of town. They're at Carroll, on both sides of Carroll. It's approximately 2,000 single-family homes, and 320 of those which are short-term rental.
Are they deed restricted short-term rental?
I will have to check on that. Our short-term rental, and I was going to get into this a little bit later, but I'll hit it really quick. We have short-term rental districts, and then as the subdivision comes through for approval, they have to be approved for short-term rental at that point. So you have subdivisions in our short-term rental overlay that aren't short-term rental because they did not request that. Lakeside's a perfect example. The entire Lakeside is in our short-term rental East District, but none of those subdivisions requested that short-term rental approval at the time they were developed. So there's no short-term rental in Lakeside. But I can check on that for you and get back to you on that. We also have 300 multifamily units that are going in Tapestry. We anticipate this to be built out within the next 5 years. They're moving very rapidly. All 4 builders in the area are very motivated. And if you've been out there, the homes are going up very quickly and they're selling equally as fast.
Nice looking houses too.
Yeah, we've worked really hard with all the builders to bring that next level to the city. We're trying to diversify our housing stock.
Greg, you know what the average values of those are?
About 250 to 280.
Okay.
So now throughout the city, what we've seen is a lot of subdivisions that were approved before the economy slid are now coming back to us. Most of these are on the west side of town. Some of them are in the short-term rental overlay district. There's about approximately 1,000 units, single-family units, and about 500 multifamily units that will probably be seeing developed within the next 10 years. And like I said, a good portion of these are in the short-term rental overlay district on the west side. It's about 50-50, the ones that come through and ask for short-term rental approval and don't.
So again, these ones that ask for short-term rental, they are deed restricted?
I knew on some of the older ones, some of them are. We typically go through our process, and if they do have the deed restriction, that is usually done later. We don't review those because we see, and again, I'll get into this a little bit later, the shift tends to happen at about 10 or 15 years that they go to long-term occupancy.
Right.
Sometimes sooner, when the boom was really going on, a lot of those units were switching over because people were just looking for houses to get into. So they were buying, even at a premium, these homes and moving in full-time. So, and I'll get a list of units that we have, or list of subdivisions that are deed restricted with short-term rental on them for you.
Thank you.
My slides are out of whack here. So our next is downtown Kissimmee. In the past decade, we've had a goal to increase the residential density downtown, and the big reason is to make downtown more successful. Instead of relying on people coming downtown, especially Monday through Friday, if we have a strong residential core in downtown, it makes our downtown more successful. And this is just added with Sunrail coming in late 2016, early 2017. So what we've done is we have adopted some pretty high-density land uses throughout our entire downtown. What you'll be seeing in Kissimmee, instead of, in the next 25 years, instead of us going horizontal with development, it'll go up. And also it'll be mostly mixed use. We're encouraging mixed use. So you'll see, and again, that will get people off the roads you'll be able to work, live, play, where you live, and decrease some of the traffic. And
Will you be able to go to school where you?
we're hoping, we've been working with you all to hopefully do that.
Ricky Beef Elementary.
And we're also, this map here shows public and private properties that are prime for development. We're actually looking for developers for the Hansel Plant site and the Toho Square site. We're hoping for a mixed use that will be mixed use development for the two properties. It'll be between 300 and 400 dwelling units. But there's also several other sites. The Beaumont site, which is currently owned by the county, but in the city, it's 22 acres. To look that we could possibly do a mixed-use development. We're working with the county right now to come up with a master plan for that site.
Get it back on the tax roll?
To get it back on the tax roll.
You gotta widen roads to make work. You got that cobblestone road.
Right. There's MLK on the one side, which is a blessing because it's
Right.
for, but then also creating a grid system within that parcel. One of our plans for downtown is to always recreate the grid system or implement it where it wasn't before, so we have that transportation. There's also a couple other sites, the Florida Rock site, which is a block from the train station. A lot of people don't realize how close it is from where the Sunrail station will be. So there's a lot of potential downtown for development. And again, we're going to go with the mixed use. One of the things we would like to work with, and we'll bring this up to the staff, is to look at the kind of developments or the kind of units we're bringing into downtown and ultimately Vine Street, and see if these urban type units will actually produce the same number of students as, say, a single family home in the suburbs, and look at ways to make sure that the school impact fees are fair for a unit that may be only producing a single child, because we're looking at a population that may not have the 2 children or 3 children per family that would generate by a single family home in the suburbs. Gonna go back to Vine Street. Vine Street, we have been working the last several years to redevelop Vine Street. It's actually going up on 9 years now. We established a CRA, and it's pretty obvious why we started this process. If you haven't driven down Vine lately, you should take a look. So the corridor is designed around nodes, and these nodes each have a different type of development. Each contains a residential component. On the west side of Vine is a more suburban, and you'll see your single-family homes, your townhomes, things like that. And then in the middle and the east side is more of an urban, so you're going to see condos, multifamily, a lot more density and a lot more height. And this is a 25-year plan, so over 25 years, we're anticipating anywhere from 2,500 to 5,000 dwelling units. We also realize that this is a new type development for the city and the county, and with our CRA, we're gonna have to incentivize that. We don't really have a lot of people knocking on our door right now saying, let me build 8 stories on Vine Street. We're gonna have to incentivize that to get that there. So, we're right at the beginning of our 25-year plan, so you're probably gonna see most of that development starting 10 and 15 years out.
Are you referencing the west as the lighter shade that's on
Yes.
here at Thacker? Is that? And then
Yes, and it goes out to, because it basically runs from city limits to city limits.
That's the same map you got the urban land institute, so book about your redevelopment.
Yes, that is it. So, thank you for recognizing that. So,
It's a while.
now regarding short-term rental, and I'll make this really quick. We've had our short-term rental overlay district for about 25 years. There's 2 districts, the east and the west. The east side is basically non-functional. The west side is, again, at the time a development comes in, it's determined whether they want to be short-term rental or not. And we currently have almost 1,200 single-family homes and over 3,000 multifamily units in the short-term rental unit. I was unable to get the numbers to show which of those are actually still being used as short-term rental. A lot of the older ones that were in there, they have converted over to long-term occupancy. And it's a difficult number to track. But we will work on that and see if we can get some numbers, and I'll work with Rhonda on that. And we have expanded it into the Tapestry development. That was done about 2 years ago. But typically, it's been about the same for the last 15 years that I've been with the city. And that's, like I said, we're being told by the newer short-term rental that the conversion is 25 years. Because there are pretty large homes, tend to be 5 or 6 bedroom with an equal number of bathrooms. And it makes it difficult for a family to move in for a long-term occupancy. But again, we're seeing 10 to 15 years typically on that.
About 4 families moving into it.
And that is a possibility, a very real possibility. So, but like I said, I was going to rocket through this. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Board?
That's good.
No, I think we're good. Thank
Craig,
you,
were you gonna hang around for the short-term rental discussion?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Sure.
great.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Mr. Tomas, you want to join us on the, Mr. Adams, you want to come up and we'll talk some urban schools real quick, and then we'll go into the rentals. Yes, you can, please.
At the back of your blue binder, we provided you with what we call 5, 10, 20-year maps. They're broken out by elementary, middle, and high. We do, based on all of the growth that we're hearing, we are required to know where we believe we will need sites over the next 5, 10, and 20 years. So briefly, the really small green dots that you see at the bottom around East Lake Toho. When we did all of those, it's about 5 major DRIs. We've already worked during the conceptual plans, and we've designated these sites as potential school sites. So whether they would be donated or purchased through impact fee credits or however we choose to do that as we go into the future, know that all of these sites have been accounted for in all of this growth that you see coming. So we've calculated those as we go. The areas, the large radius circles are 2 miles based on growth outside of the big development orders and your DRIs. Based on where all that growth is coming in, we've decided as the kids come along and we redistrict and we run out of space, These are the areas we would currently look, if we had money available, to start buying sites to handle our long-term needs. And we've done these maps by elementary, middle, and high school, and we readdress them every year.
Thanks, Rhonda.
Donated land is still a possibility.
David, I think
becoming
where
less of
concurrency
a-
went away, there's something in the land development code that says we can't take a flat-out donated site.
Oh, I don't
How
know
does
that,
that work?
I don't think our land development code prohibits you from
Okay,
taking
so
donated
then that's
land.
an option we do still have.
We would encourage donated
So
land.
we welcome the donation.
I was gonna
of
say,
land.
we're open for it.
We
We
encourage
certainly
that.
welcome
Got something you
that.
wanna donate?
Yeah.
We'll take
I'm not
donations.
part of any of these green circles yet.
Yeah.
Quality schools drive economic development.
Absolutely, yeah,
so
most,
we will-
most good developers, once you show them a plan of where you want the schools, will work with you to do that. And then you'll give them credit against impact fees typically. Donations are always welcome.
Credit against impact fees and isn't a donation.
That's right. Unless they give you, you know, there's developers that'll give you more value than what they get impact fees.
No, I get it.
Mr. Weishire, I was gonna say, however you wanna go, I know David was going into the urban school, and going over the charrettes on the, Toho and Tohoku, parcels. I know that there was some conceptual plans drawn, and I know that Mr. Adams would like to speak about urban schools. So if you want to, we'll go into urban schools, and then we'll do the impact fee for the short term. Is that,
Yeah,
however
no, I
you
think
want to
that's
do
the
it.
best order.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Larry, did you want to join us up here? or-
Well, I'm good right
You're
now.
good?
When you leave
Okay.
it up or I'll come.
Okay.
No, Larry's good there. Right?
Okay, so, welcome, John. David, welcome back.
Why don't we do
thank
this?
you.
Dave, why don't you kind of go into what you were talking about, and then I want to kind of pick John's brain, and John kind of enlighten us of some of the things that you've done as well, because I know you were in the midst of where you were rolling there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think, knowing John's here, I could probably do the intro.
Okay.
And then, because
Yep.
what we tried to do in the last year, so we talked about the principles of mixed use and smart growth for those blue areas. And one of the reasons for that is to try to make sure all the infrastructure was accommodated and the sense of place was instilled in those new developments. Schools are part of that infrastructure. So what we did last year was we hired CT2 to do a charrette, a series of meetings with school district staff, 2 cities, and the county. I think they've introduced that technical working group that we have, that we've been doing for years, to try to start that ball rolling. You know, so now we're introducing new type of development. We're trying to push the envelope in infrastructure. What's the first step in actually having schools be part of that? So, as part of the charrette, we kind of showed some ideas as to how you could actually reduce the envelope of the school to where the school itself became part of that fabric that we're talking about. So we simply from a site perspective, we showed examples where the actual school sites, you could have shared stormwater. We talked about doing community parks close by that could be used by the school. We even looked at like the roadway network patterns and parking and things that could actually contribute to the community and not necessarily be the school, you know, site.
I'm looking at the page you're on,
Mhm.
elementary school study A1, school study A2.
Yes, sir.
Is there a reason why we're looking at brand-new schools, brand-new locations with portables?
Well,
And it is.
You always want to plan for about 10% growth of your school and portables so you can accommodate it with new schools in the future. Because you're not allowed to build a new school.
Yeah,
Students
50%,
already here, so we have to
50%
accommodate them
capacity.
someplace.
Why don't we just plan on building the school a little bigger?
If we don't have enough students to justify it, we can't do it.
well, and sometimes you build for the build out of the school, and what we're talking about are schools that can actually accommodate the population within a certain radius.
I understand.
So you don't necessarily want to build bigger schools.
Well, just, I've been through this
You wanna-
before where we build brand-new schools and the question is always where are you gonna put the portables?
Yeah.
And
That's the tough part of this whole process, is trying to balance principles with operations. But So what we tried to show is that you can actually reduce the site of the school facility itself and start looking at some of these design principles for on-site schools. So as part of the process, we showed a lot of different prototypes. We showed examples from around this region and other schools in the nation that have done this. And I think you can see that you can actually reduce the school sites. I think elementary schools, we get down to 10 acres or less.
Clyde, how big was the site that was at Tahoka down in the bottom of that corner there? How big was that site?
28.
That's a
That was
K,
a
that's
K8.
and that's a K8.
Oh, that's K.
K8, yes,
Yeah,
sir.
so we basically combined K through 8 and had a smaller school
You
site.
keep, it's all two-story here for middle and elementary. Is there something against going 3 stories on an elementary?
No, it's,
You can't
Ron is good.
Yes.
Yes.
You're
You can
limited
only-
on
You can
grades.
only put certain age groups
That's what
on
I-
the first and second
Right.
floor.
That's what I
unless you
thought,
build
yeah.
designated means of egress just for that age group of child. So typically, you don't go into
Yeah.
a 3-story building
Can't
for
go
not
any higher on
based
that.
How, what is that age? Is it,
Well, pre-K1 can
Yeah.
go, pre-K2 can go on the first floor. If you move them to the second floor, you have to build a designated means of egress just for that age group. It's a totally different fire exit than where your 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders.
I think a better question, at what age can you put them on the second floor without
3rd grade
restrictions?
up.
Third grade.
and then what grade? To the 3rd floor?
After 3rd grade, I do not believe there's a
Yeah, there's no
limitation on how
restriction.
Yeah.
Is there a restriction, John?
No,
No,
there's not.
I didn't think
Okay,
so.
so-
It's only
John,
lower
it is.
grade.
so you could go 3 stories. You just need to make sure your first
Yeah,
couple.
I was just saying that would give you
You
more
could go 6
acreage.
if you want it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we went to middle school.
I don't want to be a
We'll have to have
pilot.
elevator monitors.
But I knew there was something
The John
to that.
Adams Elevator School.
Well, he's got a company on the side. I don't know if you knew that. So then we talked about some middle school product, and you got a little bit more recreation, specific recreation needs. But we talked about that.
I got a question. All this, each one of these has a piece of retention.
It's what we're trying to encourage, though, in the mixed-use districts is master retention systems.
So the school district won't be on the hook. for
So
retention.
basically, it would be off your property
Fine,
and
that's
go
all I asked.
through.
We don't-
So when a developer takes your stormwater, most of that is in these planned communities where you don't see the stormwater on your property. Yeah.
Well, it's very time sensitive if you do that, because when the school comes on, it has to coordinate when the retention is available for it. So the school can't come on at the very beginning because the retention may not be there. So you have to look at the timing of the whole development as to when the school
So in
could
the
be
development
developed
order,
on
we
the
need to
site.
say, in order for us to put the school in, they've got to build a retention first.
Right.
Yeah,
You
or
have to
you
make
phase
sure
your-
everything
you
is
phase your
there for you to
infrastructure.
Do it, and not a promise of it coming. Because we've seen where something was promised to come, and then economics go to hell, and it never develops, and then we're stuck with something.
So
else
they
going
have
over.
to put it in time specific.
Yeah,
And would
the
the
same-
development community go for that sort of thing?
Well, you're not going to get a permit with the South Florida Water Management District to build your school without stormwater management.
Got that.
Okay? So you're not going to be stuck with a school with no water
No,
management.
no, I know that, but if we need a school.
Will the school do that, or will the private sector accept that? Absolutely they will, because there is a regional stormwater management concept. That's part of the efficiency of these mixed-use districts.
So that helps them also.
Even if it's a phasing issue, you can have temporary facilities that can be permitted with a district and then converted to more regional systems. It's much more efficient in this form-based development of these mixed-use districts. And I think that's the one issue that Dave's not taking enough credit for. Is it okay if I jump in here? I'm gonna do it
I said
anyway.
that was your intro.
Okay.
I just didn't think you'd jump in that quick. I had two
These
slides.
mixed-use districts, well, first of all, it took the county 12 years to develop this growth management strategy, to adopt comprehensive plan policies, to adopt conceptual master plans, and to write an ordinance to implement all of it. So I won't take quite 12 years here to discuss this stuff.
Good.
This, it's really important to understand this is an entirely new concept of growth management and development. For 40 years, ever since we've been dealing with a zoning ordinance, we've dealt with permanent uses and development standards. This doesn't. This is a form-based development. It's a whole lot more than just increasing density and a more efficient use of infrastructure. Your question earlier about the tax base. It would be wonderful if Osceola County could pass an ordinance and say to every builder, you're not going to sell a house for less than $250,000. Number one, it's unconstitutional. Number two, nobody's going to build them unless you have an amenity package to support that market. You can't regulate a market. So what the county did in developing this strategy is went to a form-based. Dave talked about neighborhood centers, community centers, urban centers. That form-based development, we really don't have an exact example, but I'm going to give you one that's really close. Celebration has a lot of the elements of the form base. It has a neighborhood center. It has residential, pedestrian-friendly streets, the architecture, the tree-lined streets. It does have one school anyway in the adjacent to the neighborhood center. Some of the problems with Celebration is it still has a collector road back to the high school, which is off on the outskirts, and the employment center is not downtown. Okay, to give you an example of Celebration, and if that employment center were downtown, if all the activity centers, including your schools, were all centered around that mass, it would be what these policies, these ordinance is all about, the mixed use. To give you an example, just think of Celebration on steroids. That dark blob right there is an urban center. That's 90 acres. That urban center is approved for 1 or 2.6 million square feet of office and retail.
Mixed-use commercial.
Okay? These entire plans, and this is the East Toho and South Toho conceptual master plans that Dave were talking about earlier. Altogether, there's 74,450 units. There's 16 million square foot of office and retail, and there's another 4 million square feet of institutional. 4 post offices, fire stations, sheriff's office, or if it's ever, when it's ever annexed, City of St. Cloud Police Departments. And schools. Schools are absolutely every bit as important to the infrastructure of these communities and the functionality of these communities than water and sewer lines.
And marketability.
And marketability. My clients can build a house, but they can't sell it unless the buyer has a place to work and a school to put his kids in. Okay? Absolutely, schools are very important, but there's something noticeably missing from this plan. That's schools. There was a reason for that, the flexibility to allow for these sustainable communities to evolve over time. But it was addressed by ordinance. The ordinance that actually implements this plan. Urban centers are the preferred location for high schools. High schools shall be located adjacent or within the urban centers. There's a very good reason for that. Number one, that high school creates synergy for that urban center. But number two, another requirement of an urban center is a regional park. Shared facilities are absolutely been discussed, contemplated, and need to be pursued.
That's in your 90 acres.
That's adjacent to or within, okay? A high school and a regional park goes right there. Now, a regional park, you're looking at a 40, 50, 60 acre park. Can't operate it by the county. Now, I had 4 kids come through the public school system here in Osceola County. Football. And I know high school football coaches don't want anybody using their fields. And I absolutely understand it. But their practice facilities can be made available for the community. Baseball, same thing. Girls softball, same thing. It's absolutely understood. But their practice facilities, it can be shared. It can be worked out with the county Those facilities can be shared, but more importantly, they can be shared with the community. And the community then can absorb and actually accept that school. Community centers, about 20 acres of commercial and retail and office. They have community parks. Preferred location, middle schools shall be located at community centers, right here in the ordinance. Elementary schools are tied to neighborhood centers. Neighborhood centers have neighborhood parks, shared facilities. The real question is, with this form-based community and the importance of these school facilities to these centers, do you want to build schools in the middle of a parking lot? Or do you want to build schools in the middle of a community?
I have a question for you, John. You mentioned, think of Celebration on steroids.
Yes.
And that's a great analogy. Who's got the money to fund a Celebration on steroids? I mean, because Celebration had Disney money.
Well,
And Disney has deep pockets.
and that's one of the issues with Celebration. They subsidized the merchants in their downtown.
Yes, they did.
This plan is not going to be built overnight. This plan was designed, these policies were designed, this ordinance was designed to allow for the implementation, the evolution of this plan for the market to drive
Okay.
those. Okay? I'll give you another example, Baldwin Park, if you're familiar with that, the old Navy station. Well, the problem with, my opinion, the problem with Baldwin Park and some of the downtown merchants are not surviving. Number one, they didn't have Disney subsidizing them. But number two, there's not enough mass, there's not enough density to support it. You heard Craig earlier talk about creating that mass, increasing that density in downtown Kissimmee to support the downtown. That's what this forum is all about. That's what the sustainability is all about. And Clarence, with the increase of density and intensity, that tax base will rise on the same infrastructure. So you don't need to raise the price of the product. You have more product paying the taxes, and that reflects another income to the school board as well. Okay, but the real question is the benefits of urban schools.
Can I ask you one question?
Certainly, absolutely.
You talked 90 acres for these.
90 to 100 acres, yes, sir.
Okay, and you said 40 acres for something, and I can't recall.
Regional
what.
park. Regional park.
Regional park.
40, 50, 60 acre regional park.
Well, you
It
whatever
got-
it
doesn't
is.
have to be part of the 90, it can be
It's-
contiguous to the 90.
Adjacent to or within, absolutely.
Okay, and you got 46 for the school.
Mm-hmm. You don't
So
need
that's your whole
46 for
90.
school.
No, but it can be
No.
adjacent.
It could be adjacent, okay?
Okay.
But you don't need
I'm just excited, I don't do water
46,
retention.
well, you don't need 46 acres for your school. You need 46 acres for your school plus your facilities that you
That's
want
it.
to
You
provide
got
to a high
30,
school.
31 acres. Yeah.
Yeah, okay?
Yeah, I understand.
I got a question.
Here's just one quick picture, okay, that shows you the suburban schools that we've been building at the top, building schools in the middle of a parking lot, as opposed to building schools in the middle of the community, the photograph on the bottom. That's the question. You know, some of the other benefits you have of the urban form of a school, number one, you heard a lot about walkability. If you take a look at Celebration, if you take a look at Baldwin Park, you have a pedestrian-friendly network. It's inviting to walk there. Will people walk and ride their bikes to school?
Sure.
Absolutely, if it's inviting enough, if it's safe enough, if you provide that comfortable neighborhood, I believe they will. I did, my kids did. But if you build a school in the middle of a parking lot, you're not melding that pedestrian-friendly network. It's not an inviting place to go. Are there still gonna be parents that are gonna drop their kids off to school? Absolutely. That, we've become used to that, okay, and it will happen. But here's the important point. You don't have to bus them. What's your transportation budget? You wanna cut your transportation budget in half, by 60%, by 70%, by 90%? You want to cut your transportation budget completely in one of these new elementary schools? You build a school and you size it to serve the communities that are going to fill it up. It will have extra capacity for you until build out of these communities, absolutely. Your timing, you can manage those facilities that way. Not only do you have the cost savings of with the urban form of transportation, but again, you have the community accepting these facilities, accepting these schools. They become part of the community. There's studies from all over the country. Oregon, the whole state of Oregon has done studies on this. When parents get involved with their children's education is a better.
Now, you said this hadn't been done before. I'm assuming you didn't mean in Osceola County. This is obviously a concept. I'm assuming that you pointed out the state of Oregon.
Yes.
So you've taken a lot of other concepts
There
from all over
are,
the country.
yes, sir, there are mixed-use developments, you hear words like traditional neighborhood design, you hear other catchphrases of new urbanism. Quite frankly, there's nothing new about this. This is going back to an urban form. Go to downtown Charleston, go to downtown Savannah, go to the cities that developed St. Louis, the cities that developed before we had automobiles. Even Pittsburgh. It's an urban form. They're urban schools, they're urban walkable communities, and guess what? People can still live there. People learn how to function. The emphasis is on pedestrian, not vehicular traffic. Are people still going to move? Yes, absolutely. Are people still going to drive? Yes, absolutely. Mass transit can be supported through here. In fact, some of these roadway corridors are actually designed in this ordinance to accommodate mass transit. The walkability issue is available with what we've been doing for 40 years, including the suburban form school, which you had no other option because we have suburban development. You gotta build schools in the middle of a parking lot right now. We isolate product, we isolate socioeconomic by product type. The only way we can increase density, you get a higher tax base clearance is, in suburbia, is to build them on smaller lots. Then you're not gonna get a higher number. But here, there's a total mix of product to accommodate all incomes. These are the type of communities that people can move in when they graduate college. They can, their first house. When they have children, they expand. They can live, play, pray, and work in the same community their whole life. Will people do it? We believe they will. A lot of these areas are being very successful around the country, especially with the younger generation. Right now, fortunately, I don't have to deal with this, but a lot of the kids are staying with their parents, 26, 28, 30 years old.
I hope you're wrong.
Okay? But they're wanting to go back to the urban form.
Correct.
What are some of
That
these cities?
trend,
And seniors too.
Hold on one second.
and seniors, yeah.
John, a
and
couple of
seniors.
things. As a
Yes.
Seminole fan, you lost me when you used Oregon as an example. I'm just gonna let you know.
I tried.
It was just the one book
Yeah,
that
you
I
could've
found
picked
today,
anywhere else, and I
okay?
would have been happy.
tried to-
South Carolina, how's that?
That's better.
Okay. South
Actually,
Carolina's
you
done.
had me at Savannah, so we're
Okay.
good.
Georgia, yeah, I was
Um,
gonna say Savannah, you have to go there.
What we're looking at here, this is all
Yes.
just conceptual.
No,
Yes.
no, that is an adopted conceptual master plan by Osceola County.
Okay.
That was adopted in 2010. They did not have a zoning ordinance to implement all these policies, but now they do. This was adopted in November of last year.
So my question is, with this conceptual plan being in place, and let me
Yes.
turn Dave to you just real quickly, you would love to see this.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
and there's actual principles that will help the developers if they want to tweak anything to make modifications to stay within the same principles.
Right. And I say that because as a real estate guy, I would love to see this, and I know we've had conversations about that. My question then becomes, what is the impediment to this actually becoming a reality as opposed to a conceptual plan that then enables us to move away from what we've been doing and get closer to what it is that these form-based designs really look like?
Well,
So far, it was just a downturn in the economy.
Sure.
I think there was a lot of,
right.
there was a lot of momentum earlier before I even got here.
Sure.
And then it just kind of fell apart with the downturn in the economy.
Yeah,
Now
and
that
I,
the
and I understand
economy's-
that. I'm not talking about hindsight. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about anything that's happened up until this point. I'm
Yeah.
talking about from today forward. Even looking at the ones that we just dealt with Toho and Tahokwa, that's not how it is. The schools are on the outer sides of the community, and we just dealt with that in our recent board meeting.
Right.
But what we're talking about is a completely different idea. So now we have product coming out of the ground, development's taking place. We have a great conceptual plan here. We have, at least from some willingness to move in this direction. What is it taking? And I'm asking you as a planner and expert, and all of you guys that are here for that, what is it going to take for this to move away from concept and move to reality? Is it the economy where we are, the cost of product, the cost of development? Is it just an old mindset that says, well, no, this is the way we've always done it, we're not willing to make the paradigm shift? What do you think is the key for us going from where we've been to where we need to be?
Okay.
I think
And
most of the
clearly-
developers we've been talking to are actually willing to do most of the infrastructure.
Can
Yeah,
you
I
talk
don't know
about
that
the
you're
Tahoe
Clearly-
that we looked at earlier? Do
Yes,
those make
I
sense
would-
or don't make sense?
I would like to talk about that, but I want to
Okay,
address your
please.
point. The market absolutely dictates everything. You can regulate everything, anything you want, but you can't regulate a market, period. However, I mentioned, and it was questioned earlier, are these successful in other areas? That trend from suburbia is heading down. The trend for new urbanism is heading up, and right now, they're right at the crossing point. But again, that trend for this type of development is heading up. So Central Florida doesn't have a true solid market for this, but it's coming, okay? And I'll use the example of Horizon West, if you're familiar with that, out on the west side. Horizon West has a lot of these elements, okay? It's sat vacant for 15 years. Nobody wanted to build it. Why? Oh, they didn't think there was a market there. Okay, so the market absolutely dictates. The recession that we had, yeah, the four DRIs, 2 DCIs that we had out here, they just all dried up because of the market. However, there's another impediment, which ties back to my observation on the Tahokwa plan, and that's implementation. If you don't implement the plan, if you ignore the policies, the ordinance, it's not going to get done. And let me give you a perfect example. This is an urban center. I showed you the ordinance where your high schools shall be located within or adjacent to. And reason is you have a regional park. You have an urban center. It's synergy for that urban center. It helps the marketability. It helps to maintain the form. But if you put a high school up here on Tahokwa, what do I tell my client about his high school site? You want a high school a mile away? This has a community center. There's already a middle school, which is Phil, and we understand that problem, and believe me, I am not insensitive to the issue that you all have to manage. Growth is difficult, but it's manageable. It's been proven all over the country, and this, I believe, is going to help you manage it. And if you want to move that, actually, this is all green now, because the county bought that for a park, which is fine. And if you want to move a K through 8 instead of a middle school down there next to the park, that's fine. Move the community center down there with it, so you have your community park, along with the big regional park. Okay? Implementation is very important. If there's compromises made in the initial phases especially, number one, the competitive market gets compromised. Number two, siting, locations get compromised. Are we going to be able to put a high school a mile away from another high school? You tell me.
You bring up some really good points. I got a question for you.
Yes,
With
sir.
all this, and this all is great. So explain to me how your clients plan to help us fund the construction of this new school,
Okay.
of these new schools.
All right, that's been discussed, and actually, it was discussed back in '04 when we started the DRI process.
around then.
And to give you just an analogy, 4 DRIs and what turned into be 2 DCIs, which is sort of like a DRI light. 20,000 units. I think it was about a total of 6 million square feet of retail office support. That was sticker shock back in 2004 for everybody, from the school board, for the Board of County Commissioners, for staff. It was sticker shock for the public. Well, now we're talking about 74,000, 450. Okay, that's what it's evolved into over these 12 years that the staff's been working on
Again, the
this.
question is back, explain how they want to
Okay.
help fund the school construction.
Funding. You're very familiar with what Avatar did with the Bella Lago, EFBD.
Sure.
That's certainly an option. There's also options for MSBU, MSTUs, for
Right,
infrastructure
CDDs.
improvement, CDDs. Charter schools certainly could play a role in here.
Or you at Harmony did, make an interest-free loan.
Well, there's all sorts of incentives. The bottom line is this. I represented Avatar, and we did the planning on Bella
You
Lago.
did a good job.
And it was like pulling teeth to get them to commit to anything, funding-wise. They're developers. They have to compete on the market with the other developers. We finally convinced them it's a whole lot better to stand in a sales office and point out the window and say, there's the school on the ground built that your kids are going to, than to point on a red dot on a map and say that there's going to be a school there someday. Okay? They were dealing with a charter school at the time. The charter school money, state money dried up, and it evolved into the EFBD. It was extraordinarily successful. In fact, Bella Lago at the time was the most successful residential development in the country. That's how successful they were out there.
So right now, you've got clients who are pursuing EFBDs.
I have clients, and those DRIs, they did put an association together, which was monumental in itself, and it dealt with not just schools and funding, it dealt with roadways, it dealt with water, it dealt with sewer. But can you imagine 6 competitors creating an association, getting together and dealing with these issues in a regional manner? The county's done it now through ordinance, through policy. Is there opportunities? Absolutely. Can I convince somebody that's got 100 acres in here to, oh, hey, go fund the school? No, he doesn't have enough mass to afford that. Can I get other larger developers to do that? Absolutely, they'll want to do that.
So
But now, I want to also say they're going to still need to maintain a competitive edge on the market. So we're talking about a public-private partnership
Explain to
here.
me the EFBDs that are being pursued right now relative to this.
None.
Well, the first 2, hang on, the first 2 developments, Toho Preserve and Tohoqua, they are actually entering into an agreement to do the roadways.
Okay.
And I think they've also entered into an agreement with the school district.
So are they funding through
to-
MSTU, MSBU,
To do the,
CDD?
No,
to
you
do
can't,
the
they were
school.
trying to work one
Yeah,
out,
and it
and
never-
it
never
went
materialized,
south.
exactly.
Never materialized.
Okay.
And there's reasons. Let me explain on the school site. I understand John's thought on moving the high school south, but Dave can help me on this. Toho Preserve and Tohoqua are the first of those DRIs to come forward. Okay, they have to be in place pretty much to move south. The high school at build out of Toho Preserve and Tohoqua should be full. So we can't move the high school.
So you're saying that
That,
we
that's
wouldn't need
based
2 high
on
schools within a mile?
the number of units that are gonna be in these top 2 developments. So if another school site is needed in Edgewater, that's certainly something we can entertain. But I don't know that moving the, am I right, David? That was the build-out plan for those 2, were
remember,
going to generate enough high schools.
I think, John, let me, if I may, I think the point was a little different, though. It
Right.
wasn't to move it because of proximity to other developments. It was move it so that it matched the form development that we're talking about. And instead of having the high school out here, instead having it more centrally located and creating the core and the hub of the community or communities around that. That was more of the
I
point.
thought it was to go.
And
Well-
John, I got
I mean, this, I think the proximity to the other development was just an example, but to your point, the capacity would still be in place for this site
Right.
based on this, which would prove
Sure.
that point to be moot, but more importantly, having it here doesn't follow the form development that we're talking about.
That's exactly
Sure.
right. And let me clarify, I am not in a position with my professional life or with the Growth Management Task Force to dictate policy to the school board or to the county or to any of the staff. I'm just pointing out what the ordinance says, and there's a reason why the ordinance says that, and that is to maintain that form-based development. If there's an identified need that needs to adjust, compromise the ordinance, that's up to the
Yes.
people that are responsible to review and
Yeah.
vote for it.
John or
Okay?
Dave, or-
But at the same time, my client needs to maintain a competitive market. Okay?
Pay you.
And we get it.
Well-
I get it. I mean, if everyone else isn't doing it, why should your guys have to do it?
And
I
if
mean,
it's
simple.
compromising that synergy for his urban center, then yes, there's other affected parties here, and that's an issue. That goes back to the impediments of this plan. Market, number one, but implementation, number two. You need to maintain the integrity. Otherwise, if it's going to be compromised, it's not going to function.
Clarence?
Sorry.
From a purely rule standpoint,
Yes, sir.
we've got a form here and a plan that
Yes.
we're trying to get everybody to abide by.
Not trying, it is
Well,
expected that everyone will.
I'm going back to the school.
Yes, okay.
And I'm just gonna ask this kind of bluntly.
Go ahead.
Can we do whatever we want?
Well, I'm gonna give you the blunt answer.
Yeah. Let me.
You
know what I-
got three
you know what my
votes, I
question-
guess you can.
Yeah.
No, I'm just asking the question. I'm not saying that's a good, I'm asking.
Well, that's a good segue. Let me finish what I was talking about, and then
I
that way
thought
I
you
think
were
it'll
done.
tie into. Well, I did my introduction part.
now he's doing
Now
the
let me do the
close.
conclusion.
Yeah, that's it.
How's that? Okay, so we went through the initial step with the charrettes, and we talked about the ways that we can deal with these site issues that the school district needs for any development, how it plays into these mixed-use developments and the form-based that we're talking about, to show how we could shrink that immediate footprint and go to that. So we finished that, and we generated a report, and I think the participation was pretty good. I mean, both cities, the school district staff, everybody was attended the charrettes. So we came out with a pretty decent report, showed you a lot of good examples. And even the high school stuff that John was just talking about more eloquently than my slideshows can work within that concept.
I like
So-
the concept.
So the next, absolutely, yeah, because again, it's tied to the community. So when you go back to all these older jurisdictions, and I actually like to think that I live in one, I live in downtown Kissimmee. And so I'm excited about what they're doing to evolve into the higher density and all the services. So I've bought into that concept. That at the end of the first step of that was the charrette. Now the next step is, you all have operational needs. So, what we're talking about are elementary schools, and I like the K through 8 concept. That came up after the charrette. I think you guys kind of evolved to a K-8 concept to be more neighborhood friendly, because you can really get a nice community school K through 8 and walking distance, the same folks all the way through, and the families and everything. So, the next step really is school district now taking a step back and saying, okay, how do we now make our operations tie into this concept, and what is the cost for building a unit based on following this? And so, I've got, even with the K through 8 concept, I probably got a couple more schools, because you're building them smaller to fit into the radius. We think they're better, but you've got to count on your staff to tell you, okay, they're better, but it's going to cost you $1 extra a square foot, and might raise your impact fees or whatever. So you've got to talk about shared concepts on cafeterias, maybe even principals, I don't know. I mean, so there's a lot of things that you deal with your standards that we don't really get into the weeds on. So The next step then is for your staff to actually now take these concepts and say, okay, well, this would equate to this many extra elementary schools or K through 8s, this many extra, well, middle schools or K through 8, and this many extra high schools serving this population. This is kind of how we would address it operationally. It would save you money on transportation, might cost you a little bit extra on efficiencies, on supplies. I don't know, I'm making this up now.
Right.
And then come back to you and tell you what the differences are. And then that way, when you make your policy decision, that yes, the county's got the form and we've got the implementation going, we can now take what's available for schools and make that work doing this.
Right.
And then that way you can give direction to your staff saying, now we can move forward and let's lockstep and move forward. So that's the kind of the next step. The next step is what's going to cost you and where are those efficiencies,
Right.
where does it cost more, and what kind of rules on floors kind of weigh in. And then that way you, with your eyes open, can tell us now, not only can we meet the infrastructure and the form needs and balance the jobs and the housing, but we can now provide the schools in that envelope, and we know what it costs and we're good with it.
Right. So board, here was my desire behind all of this today was, I've been talking about the need to kind of move in this direction. John and I happened to chat with one another 6, 8, 10, 12, whatever it was months ago, and found that there was a commonality in what he envisioned with what schools and community and development should look like, and what I envisioned based on my real estate background and then also sitting on the school board. The purpose of this is to kind of bring this out and say, here is a different way for us to look at skinning the same cat that we've been skinning. The evolution of this then becomes, and I know we've got our assistant superintendents and deputy here as well, and this is what you were alluding to, the curriculum side, the operational side. How does all this fit and function with us being able to deliver the education that we want? From a conceptual standpoint, from where I sit, from a school construction or a real estate piece, this all makes a lot of sense. And Clyde and Rhonda and Chris and everybody, we need to then come to you guys and say, talk through the challenges and the details. Let's get Ryan at the table, right? So we can talk through some of the challenges surrounding athletic facilities and so on. My desire, board, was to open this conversation up and begin for us to say, what we've done in the past isn't, we can't call it wrong. It just is what it was. And everyone did the best that they could based on the challenges that this community faced and built schools the best way that we could and we knew how we can afford to. My point is, just because we did it that way for the last 10, 20, 40, 60, 80 years does not mean it's the way that we should do it for the next 10, 20, 50, and so on. Now, Clyde and your team, and then superintendents and your team, my request would be that then there's conversation surrounding this for us as a school district, and how do we begin to look at how we're going to incorporate these components in. Is it going to work for us from an operational as well as from a capital standpoint? My belief is that it could, and my request would be that we think completely outside of the box on what we've typically done, that the answer isn't that, well, no, that doesn't fit our prototype, or that doesn't fit what we've done, but instead the answer is, let's figure out how to make this work. If it's more cost effective, if it changes the dynamic of how a community is going to operate, and we're going to truly create that live, work, pray, play component, and we want to be an integral part of the community, which we have to be, and love. Yeah, that's the greatest of these. Sorry. But if we want to get to that point, which I think we all do, then this is the launching point of us having those ongoing conversations. So that was my desire. I didn't want what John and I had briefly talked about to sit between us. You guys are the decision makers. All of us now kind of have an idea of what the options look like, and then we just keep, tossing this around and figuring out what the options are.
And I do appreciate you inviting me. I just passed out another little photograph that I just downloaded this afternoon. That's Osceola County's courthouse. That could be a high school.
You might have to beat the judge to death.
Okay? I mean, but that's the form. That's
like that idea.
That's the type of form that we're talking about here. A couple other examples.
I was wondering why you gave me that picture,
Yeah.
by the way. I'm like,
A couple other examples. I mean, you've got Miami built a high school with complete recreational fields on 30 acres. Miami built a high school on 15 acres. That's the same size as Thacker Elementary property. a high school, 15 acres.
Hialeah, they do it.
This has been done even in closer places than Savannah and South Carolina and Oregon. It's successful. It can be done. It just needs to work for Osceola County.
This is 25 years? 20 years, 15 years?
Well, it could be 2040. It could be 2040.
30 years.
Okay, it could be,
20.
yes.
Thinking 20.
What I was talking about is you were talking about the intersection of suburbia and urban.
Yes.
What happens in 2030 if now urban's this and suburbia's this, and then everybody wants a little more sprawl, a little more space.
Okay, so how this is designed, we talked it's form-based, and the reason they say it's form-based is for that very reason. We're putting the infrastructure into place to respond to the market. So just like Craig talked about how this downtown Kissimmee's evolving, will be the same thing here. This may take 3 lifts. It may be 3 generations before we get to the ultimate build-out area.
Because isn't that what made Osceola County attractive in the first place to a lot of
You're
people?
absolutely right.
I'm going to get out here and I'm going to spread out.
But can I tell you what generated this form, these policies, this 12 years of work? Cost. Osceola County couldn't afford the infrastructure. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, I've been there, done that.
Suburbia cannot be paid for unless you have a winter park tax base, and we don't.
But they're pretty close to form-based too.
They
Winter
are.
Park- The reason Winter Park
Let me
is
do
don't
this.
have
I
pavilions
want
is 'cause the
Don, what I was
infrastructure
asking is if you had anything you wanted to add, because we're talking about different components with the county. I want to recognize that you're here, so please, absolutely.
Well, there's a chair, there's an extra chair. I showered.
You'd have to sit.
Don's gonna come up here, I guess.
Sorry, Don.
And identify all the heresy I've been
And then
speaking.
Larry, I was just turning to see if you had anything you want to add as well, because I know you deal with this as well. so.
All these seats.
You want to say, thanks, Chair. All I really want to share was the conversation, with regard to the conversation you all had earlier. It's greatly appreciated. Similar to the one we had, was it last week or the week before? We're talking about what's the best way as a community to pursue these things. And from the county's perspective, we think that this is the best way to pursue education from the K through 12 level, from having walkable schools and urban schools, and just appreciate the school board's willingness to at least discuss the idea of what that might mean and do this in a different way than we've done it before.
Good, thank you.
Thank you for that.
Sure. Larry, anything you wanted to add?
You can take this chair, Larry.
Is that the hot chair?
We're going to give you half the time we gave the county manager. How's that?
I probably would have sat back down over there.
Well, Larry was part of that 12-year ordeal as well. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm that old. Probably won't see this happen, but let me say this, that the conversation you're having with the county staffs and the city is a new way of doing things. As John said, we can't afford the old way. And so we have the intelligence now and the leadership of the county and the cities that are looking to see how all this is going to work and how the public can afford it. I guess the caution I would have, having been involved in this so long, is to tell you not to panic. It's been going on a long time. You know, you talked about what, when, where, and how much. The mechanism for that is the market. Right now, the county is doing 1,000 units, say, a year, building permits. When it was in the heyday, it was 3,000 units. With the population that's in the urban growth boundary, at that rate, it would take you 500 years to fill it. You know, the urban growth boundary would probably hold 1.5 million residents. We're talking about doubling it in 20 years. All of these things are going to manifest themselves. The partnerships that's going to be gained between the cities, the counties, and the school system are what's going to work these out and make them work. There's not a panic. I mean, what happens is the market. Jay, you always ask, when? How many? Well, I'll tell you what, if I could answer that question, I wouldn't be sitting here. You know, I'd be somewhere else trying to figure out how to make a living. But the truth of it is you don't have to panic. You know, we're not going to go to 3,000 units right away. We're not going to go to 5. We got 500 years of capacity inside the urban growth boundary, basically, because we want to save the rural area outside. That's why it's planned this way. So there's no rush about this. I mean, the details, the nitty-gritty, there's no rush. Those plans haven't been finished yet. They haven't been knocked out yet. What we need to have is the cooperative partnership that these are changing, and we're going to work together, and we're going to solve these problems, and we got time to solve them. We have to. I probably won't see the resolution. I hate to tell you folks here, probably a lot of you won't see the final product of the resolution, but what is really important is the county and the cities have now made a plan to go forth much longer than all of us. That's what's really important, and to develop a county that is user-friendly, that's really high standards for our public that wants to meet here and attracts people. The school system is a major part of that. It can't be left behind. You know, I'm kind of preaching now, but I want to say, you were talking up here, I got the impression that, you know, we were going to get all 10,000 of those projected units in that one thing tomorrow. And let me tell you, I wish that was true. I wish we were knocking out 5,000 and 6,000 building permits and occupations every year, because boy, we would be busy and the economy around here would be on fire. But that isn't what's happening, and even in our heyday, that was not the pace at which we were going. So let's not look at 54,000 units like it's going to be here tomorrow. We got time to plan those things. We got time to develop new strategies, new school layouts, the way it's going to operate, how the public is going to access it. I mean, if you go over to Mary Bryant, how many remember Mary Bryant Elementary School?
I went there.
I understand. Do you remember that it didn't have any parking lots?
I do.
And it was just a neighborhood school that the kids walked to. And it was a great little school, and what did everybody do? They moved out and built bigger ones with these asphalt jungles around them, because that's the way suburbia works. It's no longer suburbia. Take Thacker Elementary School. I maybe remember that when it was first built. It probably had a total of maybe 15 parking spaces over there, and everybody walked to Thacker Elementary School because it was a community school. So we've been there. We left there because the county was developing as a suburban county, and it was soon realized that it couldn't carry the infrastructure costs to do that. So the county implemented the changes to do that. So don't panic. There's time to get there.
There were only 15 spots at Thacker because of all the hitching posts that were nearby.
I understand. And maybe it'll be bicycle hitching. You know, the kids ride their bicycles to school.
There were a ton of those.
And there were a ton of those. And I understand that the times have changed and safety issues have changed. But if you bring the neighborhoods back into around the schools, those neighborhoods will protect those schools just like they did back then, and kids will be able to walk and go to school and enjoy the parks and the same things that they did maybe years ago. So that, you know, I wanted to say that. We don't need to panic. It's not coming as hard and as fast as you think. We wish it was, you know, those of us that are in the business community, but there's plenty of time for us all to work together and get it all right this time as we're going through the system.
Here's the catch, though. We can plan a lot of stuff. We don't have the money to build what we plan.
Well, it'll all come, Jay. You got impact fees, 100% impact fees.
I know.
You got developments that's going to be helping you build infrastructure around it. The whole new form is totally different than suburbia.
Right.
They're building infrastructure inside whole areas now so that they can come to it. It's a different plan. Listen, my dad used to always say, and you've heard this 100,000 times, if you do the same thing every day, you always get the same results. We're not doing that anymore. If the school continues to do that, they're going to be outside the loop building suburban schools when the county is doing everything it can to urbanize. Whether you like urbanization or not, it's urbanizing. And so you don't have an urban area with 1.1 units per acre, and that's what the county averages now. You need 5, and that's not even an urban area. You need 8, 10, 12 units in the areas that you're going to deal with that. If you don't like that, I guess the plain fact is you need to move, because that's where it's coming. So that is
plenty of areas
unfortunately
for
a
it.
reality of what is occurring here. And so it will happen. You've got a mechanism. Everybody working together will solve that mechanism. Thank you.
That's good. Thank you. Okay, Clyde, I want to come to you, but I want to just make sure that I acknowledge the work that you and Chris and Rhonda and your whole team do, John, everything you guys do day in and day out. And I want to make sure that as my comments are made about what we do, that there is absolutely no comment whatsoever, any slight on anything that's ever taken place, and the hard work that you and your team do day in and day out to make sure that we've got good quality schools in Osceola County. That's not lost on me. It's not lost on the rest of the board. This is just an opportunity for all of us to work collectively to figure out how we're going to improve what we do. So I want you to know I appreciate that, and I wanted to say it in front of all your peers as well, so they know how much this board appreciates your work. So,
And I appreciate the collaboration and cooperation between the cities, the county, the school district, our friends from the land planning and engineering side. I mean, you know, we are very lucky that we've got these relations, but we all know each other. I mean, you know, I mean, we see each other here because we got a function to do here, but we've all known each other for a lot of years. A lot of people come in this room, so it's not like we see you once in a while and we forget who your name is. What's his name again? I mean, what's your name?
That's absolutely right. I've been here 30
We all got a
years.
bunch of different names.
We've never, the boards have never communicated, the administrative team, you know, having Don and Beth here, what a great showing. I mean, you know, they come out, they support us. David comes down and gives us a presentation on like 4 days' notice. Craig does the same thing, Dennis from St. Cloud. What a great thing. And then John and Larry wanted to come in. This is great. It's what we need to continue to do. And I hope when you guys get it together with all the other boards that it carries over, because staff, and I give Rhonda all the credit in the world. You've worked with her. She's out there. She's putting us in line to do the right thing.
Yep.
And John and I have lively conversations sometimes at Growth Management. We have a good time.
Yeah, John,
But other than that,
John
we
has
both
lively
care about
conversations,
this
but you can't-
community.
we're
Okay.
passionate. That's
John
right.
only
Remember
has
what's-
one type of conversation, and that's lively, right, John?
But we appreciate it.
Remember,
I
what's
do.
said at growth management stays
It
at growth
does, I
management.
know.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
It is so important that you, the governments, are working together. What is really important is that you have the business community buy-in to all of that too. And that's what John and I represent at the chamber from the growth management staff, is part of the business community trying to bring us all in to the system to help solve some of the issues that we have. This is our community. It's our business community. This is where we make our livelihood. And so it needs to be sustainable and needs to be a high quality of life for our children to be raised here.
Agreed. Amen, preacher.
Amen, brother.
All right.
Okay.
John, thank you for your time, and thanks for
Thank
all the
you for the
information that you brought
invitation.
together.
We want to keep John and Larry here, I think.
Dave, thank you for everything you've
Yeah.
done.
Anytime.
Bringing all this.
And we'd be glad to, I mean,
We probably won't, Jay, but I'm sitting beside you now, so maybe I can whack you.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. Craig, appreciate you.
Thank you
Yeah,
guys. Thank
thanks.
all of you. As
Okay,
a young guy, I want to know what happened before. Did all you guys fight all the time? All these government entities?
Yes.
We
You
kept
all
on saying,
guys?
we need Ricky. We kept on saying, we need Ricky.
Yeah, we
Hey.
did.
I followed John for many years. Still,
It's an old fight and they like it.
I've got to mention Chris Crow. He's been doing this for a number of years for us. You know, he did it on the Senate.
Still here?
I think he stepped out, but yeah. You know, he's been instrumental with growth management for us and pulling everybody together, home builders, everybody. Now, Mr.
John.
Chair, if we can
John.
go
Yep,
to
let's shift
the,
gears.
let's go to the,
Thank you.
I don't know what we want to call it, the rental, the short-term,
Resort
west side
residential.
over, yeah, I know, resort residential. Let's discuss that, guys. We've been over it with you, and John and Larry certainly have some stuff to share with you, so I'm gonna kind of let them take over on it, because they brought it to growth management before, and
Sounds good. And Clyde, there's nothing in our packets about that, correct? This is all just the stuff that we've gone over already?
And Mr. Chairman, just as a note, you've
Just that?
been
Okay.
here 2 hours already. Resort residential could literally
Take like 10 minutes.
well, it could take 10 minutes, but you probably wouldn't like the results of that. So again, talking about community partnerships, but, so I don't know whether you want to start this conversation or maybe have another workshop and let us come back and that be the only thing that we talk about, because I see the eyes waning out there. It's an important issue, and I think we should give it a time to be talked about, just like the first one.
Well, let me
And
do this
so-
to your point, Larry. I want to get the, with all due respect to anybody, this is, the board's workshop, and I want the board to be able to articulate what it is that they're looking to happen. They may say, let's just deal with it, or they may say, let's do it at another time. So let me turn to my peers and kind of get some feedback. What are you guys wanting to do with regard to this?
Well, I can address it in about 5 minutes. I mean, but I'll go with however the board wants. We can deal with it right now, or we can table it and bring it back, whichever.
I want to hear everything that growth management wants to say. If there's dialogue to be had, then we should have it. And I certainly allocated the time. I think we spoke about this workshop and how important it was, and the fact that that we canceled the meeting. And so I was under the impression that we were going to go ahead and resolve this and give it all the due time that it requires and it deserves.
Yep.
So I'm ready to do that.
Okay.
That's just my position.
Perfect. Mr. Booth, what was being asked, just so you know, no, you're fine, is because we've already gone up to a 2 hour.
After that, he's leaving.
All about as long as he can go.
Continue the conversation on short term, or I'm asking if it's the board's pleasure to continue on. Mr. Wheeler, Mr. Soto would like to. I'm inclined to. You're good.
Thumbs up.
Thacker, you're good.
I just, as long as we're comfortable having the discussion and not being tired and rushing it.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. So I don't know, Larry or John or who wants to go. You guys can kind of go with give a presentation to the board on what it is you're talking about, and then we'll come back.
Okay, I mean, I'll be happy to go first. I've heard about this ad nauseum, year after year after year, and I'm going to say the same thing I've said every time, is that unless a community, a property, etc., is deed restricted for short-term rentals, it means hotels or 55 and older, while it may be initially marketed as buy this and you get into a rental pool and be vacation rentals, or you're going to buy it and it's going to be vacation rentals, etc., if it's not deed restricted, I've seen it with Indian Wells, I've seen it with Indian Ridge, now Formosa Gardens, where these communities are, initially they were a lot of vacationers, and some still have some, in fairness, but over time, because it wasn't deed restricted and it's older inventory and people don't want to vacation in them necessarily, you're seeing the impacts of people moving in with their with their kids, and sending their kids to, West Side or Reedy Creek or Celebration High School, whatever, because it is not deed restricted. So with that said, again, if it was a deed restricted property, then, but I personally have picked kids up and dropped them off. You know where Fantasy World is on Kings Heath, behind Embassy Suites? There's kids living in there going to Celebration High School. And that wasn't designed, I mean, that was supposed to be short-term rental, and most of them are, but I'm not inclined to really, unless it's deed restricted, we have very few sources of revenue. To compromise one of the ones that we have, now, I don't know, maybe they've got an alternative offer relative to how to generate those revenues or not, but again,
I think that's fine.
Conversation over. Whoa, I've got a major problem with deed restrictions.
I'm not saying no, but they exist.
Because I understand they exist and I understand it's an option. My concern with deed restriction is, Larry's exactly right, conversation's over. We just lost the next 14,000 homes coming online out there. The problem with it is, when it converts, if it does convert, and some of these things we all know will convert over time, the school board does not have a legal course of action to go back and do anything at that point.
Right. We can make that though. We can get you.
We can, the county can adopt that into the ordinance, where if there's a violation of a deed restriction, and they can run for 30 years, by the way, that the fee at the time, whatever the fee is, the school impact fee, is immediately due. Now, how to administer, how do you collect it, what you can do, and this was actually offered up at Growth Management to your staff by an attorney, so I don't think I'm speaking heresy here, you can negotiate up front with an HOA that's gonna do these deed restrictions and identify their enforcement of it, and if there's a violation of it, that it's
But John, we
reported
know those
to
all
you.
go away and change, and you got a.
30 years.
Well, let me say
30
this,
years.
that the details
Not
of
the
that.
HOAs, the people that are, the president of the HOA this year will not be the president in 5 years.
Well,
So if you've
the-
got an HOA with an appetite for it,
All right.
that
Well,
may very
Well,
well.
we
I'm
guess that the
familiar with some of
details-
the HOAs out there in Reunion,
Yeah.
and a few other larger communities, and believe me, if there's a deed restriction, even the community I live in, which is not short-term rental, I'm not in the overlay, but if there's a deed restriction, there's somebody out there that's gonna enforce it and report violations.
I don't know about John, I am unqualified to talk about legally how you enforce those. So really, the county who is involved in that, the cities and your legal team just need to figure out how that works. As I understand it, in the past, every year the students sign up for schools. When they put down their address, you know where they're coming from. So it seems to me like there's not a whole lot of police in there. If that address, which the staff has the ability in their GPS system, determines that that location that they give where they live, which you use to pick them up with buses, tells you that it's in a short-term rental area in the overlay and that it has not been paid, bam, you got it. It's there. You know where it is. You just need a mechanism to go out and collect that fee from them.
Here's the mechanism. That's a great idea. Here's the mechanism. That's a great idea, is that if that happens and we report it to the county and the county pays us, let them go after them and worry about collecting it from somebody else.
Well, now, don't
I'm
be.
not sure the county wants to do that.
I'm not suggesting they do, but I think they are better equipped than the school district is to do that.
They are, and like I say, I've talked to Larry about it, and he's kind of in agreement. We don't have, from a purely legal standpoint, we don't have much of a course of action ourselves, other than if we have a strong homeowners association.
Well, I mean, they can set up a mechanism so that you have, and when it's
You could-
created, all these
You
you're
can set up a
talking about.
mechanism where it can be identified, a violation. Then it's the
Who's
issue
doing
of
it now?
enforcement.
Who's doing this model now?
Who's doing what model?
This model where they've got this hybrid, so to speak, where it's short-term overlay and somebody moves in and.
You don't, they've paid their full impact fee.
They've
up to
already
this
paid
date.
their
No,
impact
okay, so,
fees.
okay, somebody's.
All right, there are no
This
deed
does, it's
restrictions.
not appropriate now, but you only have some percentage of generation there, so you've collected impact fee, full impact fees, way more than the student generation that they're occurring, with the intent that maybe someday there might be a student there. And so you've got this money that you're holding, waiting to spend to prepare schools and stuff for those students that are not being generated. This mechanism says that you should not encourage students in that overlay unless they're in there. I mean, if it's truly resort residential, you really shouldn't we shouldn't encourage students and full-time residents to be in that, just like we should not encourage students to be in hotel rooms. And a deed restriction that the county can come up with may also help you in that situation where they can start to be vacated and you don't have that issue. So I think that there is some things that could be talked about, and that may end up being the overall best solution instead of just charging everybody the full.
And let me give you another.
Hold on 1 second, hold on. Let's go with Clarence.
My question is, Larry, which actually Tom brought this up in a meeting the other day. When you look at the whole model of how the impact fees are built and the total that we can get, which comes out to the $10,147, it takes into account those future use of the short-term rentals.
So then maybe you just recalculate it.
And that's
Well,
fine, but understand then,
I
if
thought the
you
methodology-
start deed restricting them out, your 10,147 may become 10,500 or some
Well,
other.
maybe it may, but what it does is you have an industry, in my opinion, that the whole basis of the impact fee is based on a generation student generation
And they are
rate.
part of that whole calculation, right?
But that industry has now matured to the point to where it is obvious that its generation rate is something different than what it is being imposed to. So what is interesting about all this is that at one time, we kind of recommended a percent of an impact fee that was calculated to see in fact what they had generated. And that did not go over very well. And we went back to the industry and said, it doesn't look like that the system is up to accepting a partial generation. It looks like you're stuck with what they've been telling us for years, you're gonna have to deed restrict. And I think now the industry has kind of bought into that. So they believe that maybe deed restriction is the best thing because they are building those communities different. They can't guarantee that 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road that they won't convert. But if the county has the ability to get those dollars at the time that a student has generated, then that fulfills the obligation of that unit. And I guess you just need to have more time to figure out how legally the school can get those. I mean, that if the county were to lien the property or the school has the same authority to lien the property, you will get your money. And it will discourage those folks from buying in those areas if they know under their deed restrictions, if they have to pay that. And I think in the resort area where we're trying it to be commercial, that might be a good thing to discourage residents from permanently moving into those things. Hotel rooms, timeshares, and all the other resort type places that they stay, residential places that they stay in the overlay of the county.
Let me do this real quick, John, too. Mr. Soto had some comment or question you wanted to ask.
Well, it was more relevant before what you just spoke, but let me see if I can get it back to that part of the conversation. How would you respond to those that see it like this, First of all, I think property owners want to have that freedom to do with their property whatever they want to do. When we're talking about restricting deeds, we're already adding another layer towards removing that freedom we all enjoy as property owners. Part of that cost, someone would say, is that you pay your fair share into the impact fees of the schools of the community, but you have that freedom now. You have the opportunity without having to worry about an enforcement mechanism from we don't know which entity, government entity, and to go ahead and convert it when the market opens that opportunity for that person, for that owner to do that, without having, immediately and be able to take advantage of that. In other words, it's a cost that provides a benefit, in the long term.
Let me address that for a minute. For years, the industry and the market did not want to accept the deed restriction because of that fact. They wanted that flexibility. We now have some folks in the industry, and we're not saying that everything in the short-term rental is going to want to deed restrict, but we have identified some individual developers that are willing to absorb that into their market, and that will be disclosed. If you come out there and want to buy one of these homes, you're going to be told right up front, this is a deed restricted community. Your unit's going to be deed restricted. You cannot have a length of stay.
You can stay in it longer, but it costs you
Right.
this to do
Here's
that,
the
and now
penalty.
you have a
Right.
conscious decision that you can make. It's not a
Right.
surprise to them. It's like zoning. If you want to build a house 2 feet from the property line, but the zoning says you got to be 10, then you need to build it
That
10.
brings up a follow-up question then,
Sure.
because now one would wonder why you have an industry that all of a sudden wants these deed restrictions. I would think.
Well, let me explain that to you. It's market driven again. We talked about market earlier with the urban schools. Let me tell you some of the things that are happening out there, and this also ties into why does Indian Wells have a higher conversion rate to permanent residency to others. They can't compete on the market. What's happening out there in the industry right now, people are putting $1 million clubhouses in. People are building golf courses when permanent resident golf courses are going bankrupt and being foreclosed on. People were tearing down homes in Formosa Gardens that were built 5, 6, 7 years ago, tearing them down, replacing them with 8, 9, 10, 12 bedroom homes to absorb that market for their mini hotels, their bed and breakfasts. Okay, the county has had to adjust their parking ordinance and their implementation of this. It's market driven. A developer right now that's building 8, 10, 12 bedroom homes, he's not going to be able to sell it to someone that wants to live there as a permanent resident. He understands that and he's willing to accept that. But again, that's the private sector making that decision based on sound marketing techniques. It's not me saying it, it's the people that are building the product.
But that also begs another question, and that is that what we're talking about here is short-term rentals. And we're talking about
Yes.
an industry that all of a sudden says, you know what, we have this business model, and we don't really foresee a conversion.
Right.
I don't understand why isn't the impact fee just part of the cost, the initial cost of doing it?
Well, the other part of the cost for a short-term rental is paying a tax to the county, the bed tax, okay? It's a sales tax, okay? So it's kind of a double dip, all right? Well, they're paying
Tell me why
for,
it's a double dip.
okay, they're paying for a student generation rate. That's a permanent resident, but then they're also paying a tourist tax.
There has to be a direct nexus, and that's
Right.
my understanding, and an impact fee of how that unit impacts the system. So it may be hard at this point with the present information that we have to prove that this person owes an impact fee when in general they don't contribute to the impact. In this particular area of the county that's been designated a resort overlay area where that's what they do out there. So you may have trouble in the future unless you pull that out and try to figure out what its impact truly is to the school, because it's now a market big enough that it deals with that.
But for right now, at least as we collect the impact fees, there is an impact from it.
No, not.
Hold on, there is, this is a legal assessment that we're doing, okay? And the reason I say that is because if what you're advocating, and basically your position is that there's no actual impact because of the student generation, besides short-term rentals, we could probably identify different types of development and different types of situations where they can make the same argument.
Well, then,
wouldn't they be also kind of like
If
in the
they
same
deed
similar
restrict,
situation?
If they deed restrict, maybe
yes.
maybe they do have
Okay.
a reasonable issue there. But the truth of the matter is that in this particular area, they've paid all their impact fees. Take the example that was given here at the board meeting is there's a development out there that's paid $5 million in school impact fees, and they have 3 students. They're paying way more per their impact in that particular area.
But they may have 3 students, but they could certainly generate more.
They could, and all we're saying is that if they generate the student, they should pay. We're not advocating that they should not pay for whatever it is they use in that specific isolated case. So it's just a maturing industry out there that needs to have some consideration. I think the least you could possibly do is to calculate their impacts, their generation rate, and charge them a portion like everybody else does. I mean, I think that would be the least you would need to do for that industry out there. That's a very specific industry that is coddling to the resort industry.
Let me do this, Mr. Soto, as well. Mr. Booth had a comment or question. I want to go to Mr. Wheeler next.
I just wanted to, it seems to be that the community can get excited when we have a sales tax and we come up with a number and says the tourists, look at how much the tourists are paying of this sales tax. Isn't that great? Let's all get behind it. But yet in this instance, the tourist is paying this impact fee, but we're not excited about it. I mean, tell me if I'm off base.
No, you're absolutely on base, but again, it goes back to the rational nexus issue. If you're gonna charge an impact fee for an impact, and if that particular unit is not generating that impact, it's a rational nexus issue.
It's no different, I think, than having a single-family impact and a multifamily impact and a condo impact. They all have different generation rates.
Right.
This industry now out there has matured and is large enough now that it has a different student generation rate.
There is an assumption, though, still built into that, and I'm going to come to Mr. Wheeler and then Mr. Thacker. There is still an assumption built in that, though, because I constantly sell homes to people, new construction and resales, that do not have any kids or not generating any kids, but are still paying that impact fee. So there's an assumption that because they're buying a single-family home and not something in the resort or the short-term overlay, that somehow that isn't the case. And I guess my point is, you know, I could sell a home to, you know, empty nesters tomorrow out on Narcoossee Road. They're going to pay their $10,000 impact fee. They're never going to generate a student out of that property, and yet that would be acceptable in what we're talking about. But yet if it was on the west side and it fell within that overlay, it wouldn't. Now, I understand your distinction in deed restrictions and all that, but if we're going to use the argument that everybody that pays also realizes the benefit, that's not necessarily true, because I pay all types of taxes and fees, and there's times where I don't realize the direct benefit of it as a citizen, but yet I pay it because it's the collective tax that everybody's paying, whether it's income or impact fees when I built my properties or so on and so forth. So to me,
Well,
I
but-
get it, but that doesn't necessarily hold true
Well,
all across the board.
It doesn't, but let me advise this, is that most of the users that we're talking about out there aren't even residents of our county or state.
Right, that was his point.
Okay, so the point is that someone that's living in town generally is a resident of our community. Those folks that are using this aren't residents of this.
And your taxes, your ad valorem taxes, we're all paying ad valorem taxes. And those units, whether they're deed restricted or not, are gonna be paying ad valorem taxes, and you're getting your share of that money. But that's not an impact fee.
No, I know that.
Okay, so I'm not an attorney, so you want to
We've got ours
defer
here.
to
We're
your
good.
attorney's advice, but it's the rational nexus issue as related to the impact fee.
Here's a couple.
No, I get that. I just use that
All right.
as an example of there's not always a direct correlation. And I use, you know, I pay $6,000 a year in I'm using this as an example, in property taxes. My parents pay $1,200 a year in property taxes. There's two people in my home, there's two people in their home. And so it's not necessarily always a one-for-one is my point.
Well, there's a couple things. First off, for clarification, Kelvin, in case it was unclear, when I say deed restrict, if you deed restrict a community for short-term rentals only, then to Larry's point, there is a hotel tax they have to pay on a nightly basis for that unit, versus if is deed restricted, then there wouldn't have to be any impact fees, because theoretically it's short-term rentals, and no one's gonna live in there, because it is deed restricted and they're paying that hotel tax. But Tim, you made a great point. I mean, all of a sudden, if we are deciding, okay, people who live in house A, that I got no kids in school, why do I got to pay into this? Okay, then they move in, then they're in the resort quarter, and I'll give you a great example. I know some people who bought a resort home. They're French that live in Brazil, but they kept coming and coming and coming. Now they got kids in our school in the same resort home, and they paid the impact fee up. They paid. So the point I want to make is, obviously, this industry understands how much it costs, and they're still making money because they still want to build. So, you know, so clearly they're not losing money. They realize the value in being here, and if they weren't able to operate in the black and turn a profit, they probably would stop coming here. So I don't think that the impact fee has been an impediment. And at the same time, when those units become 10, 15, 20, 30 years old inventory, and there's new inventory and they no longer can use it for resort, then that family is moving into Indian Ridge, which isn't Indian Wells, bigger houses, etc. I mean, granted, they don't have the $1 million clubhouse, but it is converting. But that industry, it's not losing money. And if it was, then they wouldn't build here. They'd find another model or another place, but they are making money. They see the value, and they want some relief. I understand that. But, they can't guarantee me that there's not a family that's going to move in 10, 15, 20 years, or this French family that bought 3 or 4 years ago that now decides they need to live there and send their kids to our schools.
But as
the
long as you have a
ordinance-
mechanism to collect it,
Right.
Jay, that's not the issue.
And I'm not smart enough to know what that mechanism should be. Fair to say. I think if
so-
the county wants to enforce that and pay us, then that works great, but we're not gonna be chasing people down as the school districts.
Well, and I have a question regarding the trigger point on that, but Mr. Thacker.
Mr. Booth wants me
I
to
just
yield
want,
1 minute.
I understand your rational nexus.
Yes.
And because we went through this several years back with the fire department, wanted on agriculture land $2 an acre.
Right.
For nothing.
Yes.
For nothing. So
Yes.
I get both sides here. For us, that would have cost us an employee, no telling how much it would have cost
And just
Deseret.
because you make a profit don't mean you need to pay that, right?
Well,
Well.
I mean, honestly, just
No,
because
I
they make a
understand.
profit don't mean they
But
need
I
to pay.
wanted
They know
to
that
make sure
going in,
you
that's part of the
understand that I'm
business
with
model. They
you.
know
And
that going in, Larry.
But
Well,
I'm
now
with,
they do, but
I'm
we're
with
trying to
everybody.
change
Hold on one second, guys. Mr. Thacker.
Now, please, I yield back my time.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we got somebody who can address the study and the rationale of the study, because when we're having this conversation, if any decision we make here, whether to say deed restrict everything or let's look at a reduced rate, I think the way I understand the study to work, and again, I hadn't even thought about this yesterday until Todd brought it up, is basically the pot of money stays the same. So by any change we have here, based on the study, are we going to impact the amount that we could charge for a single-family residence? In other words, they are lumped into that grouping today. You take 10% of that grouping out, is that gonna mean instead of 10,147, it now becomes 10,500? I don't know.
First of all, your student station costs won't change.
No, it doesn't.
Maybe your generation rate for the rest of the thing may change.
Because the
You will have-
generation rate is, if the generation rate is lower for a portion of your group, the generation rate is higher for the piece
I
that's
would
left.
say mathematically, if you remove, and that was included in the sample, if you remove those and you recalculated it, that would be the right thing to do. I mean, you want
I just
your
wanna make sure
impact
everybody knows if we go down
fee
this
to
path,
be
I think we
as
need to do
accurate,
that.
you want your impact fee to be as accurate as it can, because you're charging 100% of that. You want it to stay up. So if that needs to take place, you need to take.
You understand my question?
So let's do this. We're glad that you're here. We
Yes.
appreciate your willingness to share with us. Speak to, if you would, Mr. Thacker's point about the methodology used and the cost of extracting this piece and what it would ultimately do to the rest of the pieces that remain
My assumption
with regard to
I
impact.
guess I have to make some assumptions. If you do not deed restrict, then we'd have to recalculate, the rates would go up. Because the average number of students is depressed, and we're collecting money from everybody. If you deed restrict, and you get money every time somebody generates a home that generates the students, then that's a different question. But if you don't deed restrict, the generation,
Yeah, the deed
the fee
restrict
needs
pretty
to
much
go
makes
up.
it neutral.
If you don't charge
Which
the
makes up.
fee, you need to crank your rates up.
If it makes it neutral, I went through the whole study there, and the way I understood it is, it's looking at the total cost per student. In theory, if we deed restrict and there's nobody lives there, you've got that total figured into your total cost of collection zone. You just took a chunk out that you can collect. And that's how you get to the 10,147, just purely mathematical. So if you do that, if you take out a group, does that not raise the 10,147?
That's qualified. If you don't deed restrict, then you need to rate your rates. If you deed restrict, then these averages won't change because we're not excluding anybody that has students in their homes.
Right, that's our point.
You're never generating the student, therefore you don't have the cost.
Okay.
But the total amount, I guess what I'm looking at, the piece I'm still not understanding, is somewhere we take the number of residents we're building and we multiply it by the 10,000 and the 6,000 or whatever the other number is, and we come up with a total amount we need to build an elementary station, middle school station, and a high school.
No, you don't, look, can I?
Go ahead, if I'm wrong, if I'm thinking about this wrong, correct me, I'm fine.
Because what he's saying is, if I understand it right, and what we understood at growth management, was it costs so much to build a student station. If you present a student to that student station, you pay that, you are paying for that. So you don't have the advantage of doing what you're doing is you don't estimate out that I'm gonna have 933,000 students, and so I need this much money, and then you just work towards that much. What you're saying is every student they pays for the student that they put in there, and if it's deed restricted and they don't generate a student, then there's no student for it to pay.
When you do your update, we will have all those homes tagged. They won't be in your inventory. We will calculate a student generation rate for all homes that aren't deed restricted.
If they are not in our inventory, does that not reduce our denominator?
If they're deed restricted and don't have students, when we do an update, we will take all the rest of homes and come up with a generation rate that should be the same as what you've got now.
Cherish, let me come over to you real quick.
Right, I just wanted to clarify one thing because of the way that, and I don't know if it was just a matter of speaking loosely or the terminology, but the deed restriction, a violation of the deed restriction would be a violation of the, whatever the approved, if anything was so approved definition of short-term rental, whether it's by a number of days, a number of months, whatever that is. It's not by the fact that that home is generating a student. And that would be an unconstitutional tax or user fee on those homes that do generate students.
So it would miss the 179-day stay.
I'm very glad you have an attorney here to correct me.
I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. And
that is correct.
That's the
So
intent.
it's not an enforcement mechanism so much that a student coming from this address is in a deed restricted home, therefore they owe an impact fee. It must be based on the Constitution and the county ordinance. It must be a county-wide determination, and that's how the impact fee study is done. And there is a mechanism in place within the ordinance, the county ordinance, in order to request an alternative educational system impact fee. And there's an application process, there's criteria that must be included, there's demographic and educational planning studies that should be presented for consideration by the school board. So I just wanted to point that out and also clarify what's been sort of thrown around here in terms of enforcement, because a deed restriction isn't, as I said, so easily as enforceable as a student is going to the school.
Quick question, do you allow age-restricted homes now, and if you do, and they pull a permit, do you charge impact fees in this county for age-restricted homes?
I'm sorry, say that again.
If you have a 55-home-year-older and absolutely restrict children, and somebody pulls a permit, do you charge an impact fee now?
No, within the ordinance, there's an exemption for the age-restricted housing, and there's a mechanism in place within the ordinance.
So will the people that buy the home break the deed restriction, who's going to collect the $10,000?
And that's actually part of my concern. I know that was part of what Mr. Wheeler's bringing up. So let me think about, just kind of go through this, somebody builds the property, they don't pay the impact fee, it stays as resort residential use for 2 years. I then sell the property, a family moves in, who's paying this $10,000 impact fee? We're going point of sale, and we're going to that individual.
Going to whoever breaks the deed restriction.
It's a change of use.
If they're buying it to move into
The point of sale doesn't break
permanent-
the deed restriction.
No, you gotta go to the
Their
county.
action.
I guess,
Right, that's my point. So getting it onto a point of sale is going to be a major issue and would be something I would never support. The other piece of it is that it happens after the fact and the student actually shows up, and so then to Mr. Wheeler's point, who's chasing these people down after the fact, after they've already bought a home, they've made whether it's $100,000 or $500,000 investment in
mortgage.
property,
They have
now
a
somebody's
mortgage on it.
showing up and saying, oh yeah, and by the way,
Here's our
because you have Johnny and
$10,000.
Jill, we need $10,000 from you. I mean,
But-
that is fraught with peril. I mean, it just really is.
How do you mean?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, guys, I'm willing to have the conversation, but these are some of my concerns with this that,
Well, it's certainly going to be disclosed on your closing documents now. How many people read closing documents? Everybody should.
$10,000?
You know that.
Well, the only ones I know doing this is Orange County. You may want to interview them, because we did call them up. And
yeah, but
all
they have
the
theirs
stuff-
classified as commercial.
Okay,
Well-
and it's deed restricted to that. They have a deed restrict on it, and then now you're getting into change of use, which is complicated, and you've got to decide whether you want to implement a model that does that or not, and that's
Right.
That's the only one. These two counties are the only ones that I know in the whole state of Florida that have this issue.
Well, we're the ones
that's a
that
great
have
issue to have.
We have Disney.
Yeah, and that's true.
some. Lake County's got
Well,
it.
other places have beaches, but they're not thinking about
Well,
it.
Look, we understand that deed restrictions, it's like any other law, okay? build a road and put a stop sign on it. Some people are gonna break it. Most people aren't. But once it is broken, it creates a dangerous situation. It has to be enforced. We understand that you need a mechanism to enforce it. Hey, I don't know, go cut a deal with the HOA to say, hey, turn people in that are violating this and we'll give you a kickback. I don't
I
know.
like the idea of looking
Hey,
at the rate, looking
pay
at
them
the
to
impact.
enforce it, you know?
What we talked about a while back, looking at the impact. We already have 3 rates. We have the single-family home, we have the multifamily, and we have the mobile home.
Right.
And if you go back and you look at the impact, generation rate, which is what the ordinance says you have to do, it's based on the impact. So you look at that impact, when you do that, it's gonna give us the ability, I think, because it's not deed restricted, it will impact the rate of the single-family homes that are left also, which will raise it, which generates the same total dollars roughly to us, I think.
No, it should generate the exact same total.
So this is part of what this comes down to is, number one, the board's willingness or tolerance to look at something like this in the first place. The other part then becomes, well, let me address this in 2 different ways. Number one, we have, and this is me speaking on board, you can head nod if you agree with me on this, I guess. We have an impact fee that this board voted to approve and is at the county, and I know it's our desire to see that ratified and move forward as soon as possible. And from where I sit, I see these as 2 very different things. What this board has already voted on is one piece. Dealing with this resort residential piece is another component. My willingness was to have the honest conversation surrounding it and say, explain what you're thinking and how you think this can work, and then we have a fiduciary responsibility to figure out, do we think that this is the right thing for the school district and can it work? Or to my point earlier, is it fraught with peril? Here's what I would say, is that, and this board where I'm looking for your input is, I'm getting the sense that the board is not inclined to deal with this and doesn't agree with the idea of going this route. And to Mr. Thacker's
Deed
point,
restriction rate.
okay.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, as
Or
a
which
whole
route?
at this point right now is what I'm saying. To Mr. Thacker's point, and I'm going to ask you to clarify if I'm wrong, is the only way that you would even consider doing something like this would be as if the study addressed it. So then the only end result of that is that then we have to look at the latter part of this year, spending the next few months working through a study, reanalyzing everything and bringing this back September, October, November, whatever that looks like, so that then the study can reflect what it is that we're talking about and whether or not there is a recalculation that needs to take place with those rates. But none of this, in my opinion, has any direct impact on what this board has already voted on and what we're looking to do or what this board has voted to do with regard to the current impact fees.
I agree, no impact on what we've done. I hope it doesn't take till August.
Okay. But I'm coming to you. Are you guys in line with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you guys on the same page with that as well, Mr. Soto?
Well, you know what, I've listened to what you guys have to say, and you've made some very strong points. First of all, as far as the rational nexus test, I mean, the fact of the matter is that just it's hard to foresee whether or not what these properties, how they're gonna end up being used in terms of generating students. It's hard to foresee. But we can look at past data, and I actually looked at that because I anticipated this concern. And history has shown us that we should expect that, and it is quite foreseeable that these properties will end up generating students to our system and making an impact in our district, based on past data. Now, I understand that your argument is that we have a business model now, a business community that is looking to restrict itself and find ways so that that doesn't happen. But, we gotta go with what we do know. And so I do feel that there's a relation to it. But equally important is just what the chairman just spoke is that, we right now, I don't see what the benefit is to the district to even consider doing this. In other words, to the district itself. In other words, it looks like we're just gonna be converting ourselves into an enforcement entity that nobody here knows how it's gonna look like or how it's gonna work. And quite frankly, I don't even sense an appetite from the district to be involved in that. So it may be that in the future there's a better time to talk about this. Maybe the proper way of addressing this issue is kind of the way that the 55 and older issue got resolved, through statute or legislation that would take these business concerns. But right now, based on everything that everyone said, including, what I've heard from your side, it doesn't seem like it's something that, there's no benefit. It's just a lot of pitfalls, a lot of unknowns. And we may just be shooting ourselves in the foot in terms of the future's gonna look with these properties.
Okay, well, hold on 1 minute, guys, because Mr. Wheeler was
Yeah,
next.
and I'm gonna share this. I'm willing to look at anything. I really don't want to spend a lot of time in payroll or fees for anybody to really look at this again right now. We've had, not to harp on it, we had 19 schools go backwards last year. We got new testing standards coming. We got 58,000 kids, and really, I think that's where the board needs to have its focus right now, is on student achievement, which is, again, I appreciate the conversation. Larry and John have known both of you for more than 10 years. I'll talk to you anytime. You can call me. If somebody does a study showing something, I'm going to look at it, but I think we need to focus our energies on student achievement. I really think that's where we really need to be spending the lion's share of our effort, our energies, and tell staff that that's the direction we need to go. And we've looked at this. We have voted on an impact fee. And I don't think anybody here is averse to looking at anything new, but I don't want to spend a bunch of money chasing this down either. And have staff do it, and have consultants being paid, if there's another entity out there that wants to pay for all of this, God bless them. But we don't have a bottomless bucket of money. Our money, we're short on money for a number of things, technology, etc., and the list goes on and on and on. So I appreciate the conversation, and I'm willing to have it at any time, but I think as a board, we need to focus on some different things.
Okay, let me do a couple of things. Mr. Walter, I think you want to set Mr. Thacker. I'm going to come to you first, though.
I agree, I'd like to focus. What I don't want us to get focused on, though, is a lawsuit from the home builders on.
You've been sued before and they lost.
I get it, but you talk about a focus, that's money, a lot of money, and not that focus.
Okay. Mr. Walter?
First of all, on Jay's comment, consultants are really good, just so.
Especially.
I just want to make sure that the record goes down and says,
I agree with you on that.
consultants are really good.
Engineers aren't consultants. Engineers are really.
I think
Except
you
for
bring
on the
up,
growth
I
management task force, we don't
Mr.
get
Soto
paid.
brings up
Yeah.
some important points, and I just wanted to add this to the information that he has. This is not the only difference to resort residential. It has a different trip generation. It has a different parking requirement. I mean, there's a lot of differences out there, and the county has started to recognize those because, as you said, they did studies. They did the studies for so many years to show them that the generation rate from them, transportation-wise, is so much different that finally now they've taken and they've actually indicated, instead of having to do a study every time, which I'm sorry for at the behest of a consultant, that we don't have to do those anymore because it's a true fact. So it's important for you to recognize when you say it's just part of the community, that sector out there is different. It has a bunch of different little things that go on that have been proven, and they develop a different way under different criteria for different reasons because of the impacts that they have. That's all. Just want you to know that. It's not just the school and not just the generation.
And very briefly, our motivation as a growth management task force, we came to your hearing. We heard, no, we don't want to do a reduced rate. What we heard was deed restrictions. So we went back to the industry, and they said, okay.
Some of us said
That's what we
would have a
have to
conversation about a reduced rate.
That's a business decision for them.
Well,
You're telling us now we keep.
your action did not
can't do
include a reduced rate for the short-term rental for the resort.
We said we'd
residential.
address it after the first of the year.
Yeah, well, it's after the first of the year.
Here we are.
So are you telling us now, Jay, I want to make clarification, are you telling us we can do deed restrictions
If you do
and
55
restrict them, or we can't?
If you do short term, and I've always been told, so chairs, if it's deed restricted short-term vacation rental, so to speak, then they don't have to pay an impact fee, correct?
It would depend on what the definition of the short-term rental is, how it applies to, certainly a hotel is something different than what can be used as a single-family home, but is being deed restricted as a potentially short-term rental. And it would really have to be, and that's why I pointed out the mechanism in the impact fee ordinance, to have all of that information before the school board to make those determinations as to whether or not there should be some alternative fee for these.
And in fairness, I was always told if it was deed restricted short-term rental, no matter what.
I was helping you out, Jay, because I
I know.
wasn't hearing that around the table.
No, I know,
so
that's why
I didn't
I-
want you to stick your neck out
That's
there and
why
say,
I
well, just deed
clarified. No,
restrict.
I won't, that's because I'd always, in fairness, townhomes, single-family residence, apartments, hotels, supposedly, I'd always been told.
And
was the
unfortunately,
same
that's what the
restriction.
industry has heard for a long time, is just deed
So
restricted.
I
And so now they've decided to do that, and there's a big pushback, and that's
there's a
why.
gray area.
That's why we're here talking about it, because the industry now is ready to deed restrict. They will deed restrict them so that there will not be anything but visitors in those homes for that time period. Or they're willing to tell them that they have to pay the fee. So that's why we're trying to get this figured out. They're ready to go forward with that.
So, in fairness, to that point then, they need to be talking to the, like, we're talking to our lobbyists to get capital funding for our schools. They need to be talking to their lobbyists to pin that down, so there's a definitive statute that's very specific relative to that. It sounds like right now it's not. And it's nobody's fault, but it just isn't. So they need to get something pinned down relative to
There's
that.
short-term rentals within the two cities as well, not just in the, just what we're talking about here. Where does it end? I mean, what is, if we're gonna ask the consultant, what is he looking at? We gotta get with the city of Kissimmee, they've got short-term rentals.
I agree.
Coming out of the
They have
ground.
the same issue.
But you're not focusing on that issue, you're talking about out west.
Because
the
that-
resort area.
That
That's
is
what
the
you're talking about.
easiest one to resolve.
But if we
because
take
it's
all
a
of these
resort.
off the books, Tim's gonna be selling a house with an enormous impact.
Highways and
I
that's
can
11,000
assure you.
closing.
You think what we've got now is high for a single family, I would assume it's gonna be much greater.
Well,
Because you're gonna take a lot of units off.
And these
Clyde,
people
you
are
know,
making money
you and I
still.
obviously disagree, but,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
Sure.
But I think the industry is now getting sophisticated enough, and it understands actually what's going on with this, that it has become a concern of theirs. So I think that will try to continue to figure out how to work with this issue, whether it's at the state or whatever it's at, because they're trying to deal with this issue now. They finally understand it. The market is not like it was 5 years ago. They can't just, every price is okay. And so it's a marketing issue. They may turn around and say, we don't care. Okay, well, then the problem's solved. We're only the messengers of that industry, saying that the industry has a concern with that, and we've been trying to see if there's some way to resolve that issue that way, that's all.
And the reason why we're focusing on the short-term rental overlay is because that is the area that Osceola County restricts new short-term rental to. They can't build it anywhere else other than in the
But
short-term
those
rental.
people are, I know people are sending kids to their schools from these
But
short-term
I understand
rentals.
that because they were never deed restricted and they
all-
paid
they
their
paid up
fees.
to this
Right,
point, they
and-
paid
right,
them.
Okay.
then they're entitled to
And
it.
again, I want to point out that we don't anticipate 100% of the new development out there is going to want to accept a deed restriction for their marketing program. Okay? And those that don't accept it, that don't deed restrict, are going to be paying your fee.
Craig, does your
Okay.
short-term rental aspect fall within this overlay as well, or is it completely outside of that? Do you know?
It's behind you, Tim. That's their overlay in the yellow, and it's outside of,
It's adjacent
the
to.
town. Yeah, it's just a little south to it, adjacent.
Yeah.
South of adjacent.
It's adjacent
Show me
to.
what we're talking about here.
City of Kissimmee's overlay is right here,
Right?
and
Up, okay. This big line,
so
the big line.
No, she doesn't.
that's Shingle Creek, here's the boulevard, so it's some of this.
Okay.
So, I'm not sure all
The
of it.
county-
This is definitely a separate
Right,
overlay.
yeah. Separate.
The
But can I
counties,
ask a quick question?
Sure.
As from a staff, when you're talking about deed restricted communities, and I hate to keep picking on Stony Brook, Stony Brook is a community that wants short-term rental and
Right.
non-short-term rental. So you're saying you would no longer have a split community, everybody's either all short-term rental or they're not, so you
I-
wouldn't have a Stony Brook community anymore? Because how do you deed restrict a community and you allow them to build every other home on a short-term rental and every other home on a non-short-term rental? who's monitoring that student population? Because that's kind of what would happen with Stony Brook. They have 945 non-short-term rental, short-term rentals, 700 non-short-term, and right now they have 1,285 units on the book that they haven't told us yet if they're gonna build short-term or non-short-term at their total build-out. How do you monitor a community like that?
Well,
So when I hear.
I
Speak to that. I'm with Lenore
Oh,
on
okay.
Yeah.
Champions Gate. We're not looking to deed restrict in Champions Gate.
Okay.
However, I think the money and the number of kids, I think was our example. I kind of walked in 10 minutes late.
Yes, sir.
4.5 million, 5 kids. I think the numbers
Well,
are-
if you count, in all fairness, I do want to clarify, Integra Meadows is part of Stony Brook, which is part of your 5 million calculation, and while it's not going to seem like a lot of children, they're more at about 55 to 60 students, not just the 3 or 4 we keep hearing, but I think because Integra Meadows was built before the recession, everybody forgets they're part of the overall count, so they are generating more than the 3 or 4 students that are coming out of the current short-term rentals.
So
But
for
they've all
Champions Gate, we aren't looking to deed restrict, but we do feel that a reduced rate is the way to go there. Story Lake, Osceola Trace, same deal. It's going to be half residential, half short-term rental, and we are looking to deed restrict in that in the short-term rental component, assuming.
So it's not
that
as
could be,
simple
figured
as
out.
pulling up to the entrance of a community and knowing there should be no bus coming, because you're talking about taking a community and some of them are short-term, and so now I'm back to just trying to figure out how you track and monitor how many kids should be getting on the bus at the 50/50.
Well, I'm
That's just
familiar
me
with
as a
the Story
staff.
Lake. I think you might have misinterpreted that. Story Lake is looking to have some short-term rentals, some permanent residents, but there is a clear phasing distinction between those areas.
Okay.
It's not going to be one house.
Not the every other like we've seen.
Right.
Okay.
They're going to do that by development phasing, development parceling. In fact, it's separated by a lake there, so there's a logical.
Staff, it's all or
Yeah.
none
Well,
for
let-
practical purposes, and I know that's too.
Well, you're not talking about it anyway, right?
No, what do you,
You're not.
I'm just
if
answering
we're
the
gonna do a
question.
study, who's gonna pay for it? A new study, which is what it's gonna take, right? Who's paying for it?
They've already done a study that shows the generation rate and the
Yeah, but if you
overlays
pull all that out,
50%.
changes the numbers.
Okay.
So we need a new study. Who's paying?
But you gotta find out what the cost is, and then we'll find out if the industry wants to
You
deal with
pay,
it.
I'll have a conversation.
I mean, what we'll do is
I mean-
that you'll tell them this. They will decide if the cost of the study is enough for them to pay for it. I mean, it's all down. It's what it ends up in the end is are we treating the general public and the business community fairly? That's really all it boils
Yes,
down.
and I
You're going
want
to
to
be
do that.
wanting that community, just to be honest. We're all trying to work together. You're going to be going to that community, I'm assuming, to get some sales tax and other things done, and you're going to want that community to participate and help doing that. So you got to be treating them fairly, or they're not going to want to step up to the thing and say, well, good grief, they don't even listen to what we have to say, so why should I contribute money to those things?
I think we have listened, but just because we're not in agreement doesn't mean we're not listening.
No, I agree with that, Jay.
That's a good distinction.
I agree with that.
Okay, so, Board, I'm thinking, I know you're done. I'm thinking that
Well, I got the hint, I'm done too.
Yeah, I'm thinking
done.
we've exhausted the conversation that needs to take place. Mr. Soto, you're in a good place on this. You know where you stand. Mr.
I
Real,
think
I've heard the
everyone-
same.
I don't think we're gonna get sued, Clarence. Honestly, I don't think we're gonna get sued. I'm gonna say that on the record. I don't think so.
And here would be the last point I would make, and I think Mr. Wheeler just made it, is we are willing to listen. I mean, that's why we're here. That's why we invited the conversation. Just because we're not in agreement with how to deal with all the mechanisms, and one of my biggest concerns is the collection, how does it happen, the trigger, point of sale, all these other variables. This has been a board that's been very willing to work with and listen, and the fact that we just sat here for a previous 2 hours and had other conversations, I think is a good indicator of how willing we are to sit and say, what is the right thing to do for this community? There's going to be points in time where we disagree. And we're just going to say, look, we don't see it this way, or the majority of the board doesn't, so we're just going to have to move past this item. But I do want to end on the note that this board has shown, I think, a great willingness to have these conversations, explore them, That's not going to end. The collaboration that we've talked about for the last 2.5, 3 hours still remains in place, whether we agree on every point or we don't.
And we appreciate the openness. I agree with all that.
Good, good. Well,
We
since
ought to
Larry
come by
agrees,
Thursday morning.
Did anybody leave glasses up in this
I'm close.
seat
Okay.
that was up here?
Mr. Phelps.
Do we have a
Are we, am I understanding that we're not looking at a restudy at this point?
Correct.
At this
No-
point,
no
the board's
restudy.
not doing anything to
Correct.
study. I think Mr. Booth's point was that if somebody wants to pay for a study to reanalyze the numbers,
I am
they
more
can do
than
that.
willing.
Can
the
can
board
we
will
ask
revisit
the
it.
people who did
Tax
it to
credit
give
for
us an
cows.
estimate of what it would cost to relook at this?
Sure, yeah.
Your tax credit for cows.
No, if you can tell us now, that's great. If it-
I don't think let me.
No,
He's not asking
I'm
for you
not
to tell us
asking
now.
now.
Yeah, and a couple of quick comments. I think we got to define what is a community, what are the processes, and what you're going to measure before we go on to a study.
Understood.
Then we can formulate a study, because if you're talking about maybe the communities of certain size would absolutely have monitoring processes, they're willing to report, that's completely different than deed restricting a home.
Right.
So first of all, we need to come up with a definition of what the product is that's coming in and asking the question and what they're willing to do, and then we can talk about pricing, what it would take to analyze it.
Sure, a couple things. One, I know Mr. Thacker wasn't asking you to quote price now. Number two, if Larry, John, the industry, if they want to have that conversation about what they do or don't want included, because really this is them coming to us about it, then you guys can define those details, and then it'll be this board's prerogative to review it, weigh it or not at that point.
And I'd be more than willing to listen to anything.
Okay.
And last thing is, we're asking the county to go ahead and move forward with their next available agenda to approve the impact fee study. And
Yes,
that's moved up.
yes. And Beth, what that last comment was is that the school board was asking if the county can move forward on the impact fee study that the school board adopted as soon as possible, so that our staff has that behind them as well. So if that's possible to get it in front of your commission, that would be great.
And please let us know when it's going to be voted on, so we can attend.
Thank you, Beth. We
Thanks,
appreciate
Beth.
you.
Thanks.
I don't know. I thought you would.
We won't give up, so, you know.
I don't think I've ever formally met